Hello everyone and welcome back to LewisFiction. This is the Spectacular Spider-Man Season 4 movie version, which takes all of the episodes that I have uploaded individually onto the channel and compiles them into one movie for you guys to enjoy. If you have not seen this season before, I do recommend watching the movie version so you can get them all in one go and enjoy everything all at once. Also, if you are new around here and haven't seen Season 3, I recommend you go watch Season 3, the full movie version as well. I'll leave a link to it in the description down below so you can get all caught up and watch Season 4. With that being said, enjoy the season. Episode 1, Time of Giving. We kick off the brand new season with the status quo. Peter Parker is sat at the top of a building watching out into the afternoon sky. It's the 23rd of December and he probably should be spending time with his Aunt May. And plus, MJ and Anna Watson are coming round for Christmas dinner, he'll think to himself. He can't make another bad impression, especially after the end of Season 3. But in classic Spider-Man fashion, we kick the episode off with some classic crime fighting. Peter will have a brand new transponder, which he will carry around with him. It will allow him to pick up signals to varying police channels across the city. This will be given to him by Captain Stacy, after their relationship developed from last season. The transponder will alert Peter, and he'll be on his way to a crime. However, when Peter will arrive on the scene, it will be an engineering workshop that has been totaled. There is nothing or no one there, apart from the man who runs the shop, who is too shook up to speak. Spider-Man was too late, and so were the police. Peter clicks a button on his belt and turns on his spider signal to scout out the area, but nothing, no one. A new mystery for Spider-Man. He thinks this is very confusing. Whatever these guys stole was quick and precise, and they didn't screw around. The police arrive on the scene with Captain Stacy. Stacy says that they will look over the CCTV footage, but it'll take a while to go through all the cameras. Their interaction together is awkward, however, almost like they haven't spoke since what happened at the end of Season 3. Stacy notices something is off with Peter and asks him if he's okay. Peter says he's good. Stacy knows exactly what is up with Peter. He knows that he wants to see his daughter. As much as a good man Stacy knows Peter to be, he can't let her get wrapped up in all of this. Not with Spider-Man. Stacy doesn't say anything though, but like most things, is aware of what's going on. Stacy says that he'll be in contact with Peter when he finds anything more about this strange attack. Peter says he will as well. Returning home that night, Peter is enjoying Christmas with his Aunt May, and they have since we last saw them been spending more time with the Watsons. However, Peter feels alone. He is constantly thinking about Gwen Stacy, the girl that he finally had the chance to date, and her father, one of the only people to find out his secret, disallows him from going anywhere near her. But Peter can't tell anyone this. Not May, not Mary Jane Watson, no one. As we skip over to Christmas Eve and they open their presents, MJ looks over to Peter. She knows his secret. A big part of what I want to do with MJ and her character this season is to express how she wants to tell Peter that she knows who he really is. But this will be an external way of relaying her own past, which she keeps deep inside. And something that we will explore more about her character in future episodes and future stories. MJ is a really interesting character, and I believe that she deserves to be done justice, so this will be a small hint to what's to come for her character. Peter opens the little amount of presents that he has, and then as soon as he thinks he's done, MJ hands him a package. Peter asks what is this? MJ says to just open it, and he opens it, and it's a hat. MJ says it's to keep himself warm while he's out doing his photography in the winter. Peter blushes and says thank you. He feels really bad about not getting MJ a present, and she says not to worry, she just wanted to. Peter puts it on, and it fits him perfectly. Aunt May says that they're having Christmas dinner down at the Feast Center this year, which is the place that she works. She has worked there for a while, throughout all of Season 3, and now we're finally going to see. They all arrive at the Feast Center for dinner later that day. Aunt May isn't sure where her boss is though, Martin Lee, but reassures Peter, MJ and Anna Watson that he will be back soon, and they'll get to meet him. It's a somber moment. Most of the people there victims of some of the battles Spider-Man has took part in. Some of them hopeful that Spider-Man can restore hope. Some of them resentful of him completely. Others not bothered at all. However, some of the people's stories will affect Peter and really show him the street level side of things. Spider-Man may save the day, but the people that lose their homes, the people that have nowhere to stay at night, all reside here because of him. MJ can tell this affects Peter, but chooses not to say anything, once again keeping to herself that she knows his secret identity. Aunt May starts to cook Christmas dinner at the Feast Center for everyone there to enjoy. Once the dinner has begun, it all gets placed out on a long table where everyone sits. Everyone can help themselves to whatever they want. Peter gets his own plate and is ready to eat, but then he notices a girl on the end of the table whose plate is empty because she was too small to reach the food in time before all the adults got there. She's alone, scared, afraid. Almost reminded Peter of himself after he lost Uncle Ben. Peter reaches over and hands her his plate of food. She appreciates this, and Peter says no problem. MJ smiles as she watches on, seeing the man come out of Spider-Man. She may have been confused, she may have been conflicted about how she felt about someone she's close to being a masked hero, but she can see why. She can see why Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Peter Parker has a good heart, and his will to help others is above and beyond anyone else. Peter, above everything, is a good person. But then Martin Lee arrives late, tucking in his shirt as he walks through the door. He apologizes for being late. He spoke with confidence and suave. Peter could tell from his entrance that he was a charismatic guy. Martin approaches May and gives her a big hug for helping cook for the homeless and in need on Christmas. It's made very apparent that May is very close to Martin Lee. In fact, Peter is surprised that he hadn't met him sooner. Aunt May pulls Peter aside to introduce him to Martin, her boss. They shake hands awkwardly, Lee's posture and confidence slightly intimidating Peter. However, Lee respects Peter and realizes his strong grip and says that he's heard good things about him. He says that he's heard that he's a smart boy, but above all, is caring. Peter shrugs this off and Lee says that if he ever needs work, there is always a place for May's nephew at Feast. Peter thanks Martin Lee as his phone starts to ring. Peter says he really has to take this is important. As Peter walks to the front door, Lee senses a bit of secrecy in him. He calls this out to May. May says that he's always out and about. Lee seems surprised. He thought he was more introverted. Peter puts his new hat on that MJ bought him and goes outside. He answers the phone and it's Captain Stacy. Stacy tells him that they've checked through all the footage and nothing. There is no sign of whoever did this. The footage cuts from when they arrived and when they left. Either something is interfering with the footage in the CCTV cameras, or they managed to somehow tamper with it whilst they were there. Peter says either option is weird, which means they could pose a threat. Whoever did this, they must be stopped. Stacy tells Peter that he needs to be on high alert. The last thing anyone wants is another goblin situation over Christmas. Peter agrees, knowing he'll have to sacrifice his Christmas for everyone else's. Peter puts the phone down and goes back inside. We cut to later in the episode. MJ and Peter stand outside. Peter thanks MJ again for the hat. They have a nice moment, where once again we flesh out their chemistry and showing that they underlyingly really care for one another, and that potentially there is a relationship there for the future, but they just don't really realise it yet. MJ goes home, and Peter walks into his house. May stands at the door waiting for him, and hands him a letter. She says this was waiting for him on the doorstep. Peter is surprised. He opens the letter to see it's from none other than Gwen Stacy. He takes it up to his room, and reads it. The letter tells Peter that she misses him, and that she's tired of their back and forth. She's annoyed that he ignores her calls, her messages, and the fact that he's been blunt. She says that she's felt like this letter was the only way to tell him how she truly feels. She will say that she loves him, but for some reason Peter doesn't want them to be together, even after everything they've been through. This will finally be over. She's going to stop trying, she says. She says despite how hard he's trying not to be together, she will still love him. She tells him Merry Christmas, from Gwen. Peter holds back tears, but loosely one trickles down his cheek elegantly. Peter throws the card against the wall in anger and throws himself back against the bed. His eyes close. No matter what, Spider-Man will forever ruin his life. And he knows that there is much more to come. Peter Parker has a good heart, and his will to help others is above and beyond anyone else. Peter, above everything, is a good person, which is why he cannot and will never be able to live his dream. Episode 2, Physical Education, Part 1. We kick this episode off during the first week of January. This is after the Christmas break, and everyone is back in school. We get a few scenes where we are reintroduced to our main cast from the high school, including obviously Flash Thompson, we get Randy, we get Kenny, and we get a bunch of others that are reintroduced to us. We also get a few scenes between Peter and Gwen that seem kind of awkward, with them looking across at each other in class and also walking past each other in the hallway but not saying anything. Both of them have so much to say to each other, however they feel like they can't say it, especially after what Gwen said in her letter to Peter at the end of the last episode. After a few scenes reintroducing us to the school atmosphere of Season 3, Peter will go out to be Spider-Man for a while just to get some fresh air. He thinks over everything that's happened with Gwen and how he could possibly fix it. But with Captain Stacy as her father, and with Captain Stacy knowing Peter's identity, there isn't really much he can do. Peter ponders on this thought and thinks that Spider-Man always ruins his life. He had that one chance to reverse the effects of Spider-Man before, but then decided that with great power comes great responsibility. And over the course of his career as Spider-Man, especially at the end of Season 3 as well, that message is constantly reiterated to him as to why he cannot stop being Spider-Man. He will never stop being Spider-Man. After this one scene, Peter will be swinging through the air when he is suddenly attacked out of nowhere. Peter will fall to the ground, and a villain with a skull-like looking mask, with a hood, carrying a sword by his side, will stand over him. Peter will look up and ask, "Who are you?" And the man standing over him will say his name is Taskmaster. And of course, obviously, in classic Taskmaster fashion, he will just show up out of nowhere to fight Spider-Man. Peter will unknowingly question his motif and what he is attacking him for, as it is currently not known. No crimes have been committed, he has not even tried to stop him, plus Peter has never come across this guy in his life, even after all of the villains he's fought before. As the battle rages on between the two, Peter wonders to himself, is this revenge in some way? Does this guy know someone that he's fought before? Has Peter wronged anyone? Could it be linked back to the Green Goblin just as Scorpion was in Season 3? Peter ponders all of these scenarios in his head whilst trying to keep up with Taskmaster. However, as the battle rages on, which will be around 1 to 2 minutes of the actual episode, Peter will start to realise that Taskmaster will actually start to copy his moves. And when Peter tries to use the same move twice, Taskmaster will actually block it, almost as if he's registering Peter's fighting style in his head as the battle is going on at the same time, and then using Peter's moves to his advantage by blocking Peter's attacks and then countering them, using them on Peter himself. Taskmaster's fighting style isn't necessarily one of his own, but one where he takes his opponents and counteracts it. Peter starts to notice this throughout the battle and knows that there is no way he can win. And for once, it isn't actually the villain retreating, but rather Peter retreats instead, knowing that he can't beat him on this ground. He'll have to find another way to win this battle. After escaping, Peter still begs the question, who is this guy? What was he doing? Why was he trying to attack Peter? For what reason he doesn't know, but Peter immediately contacts Captain Stacy after the end of the last episode as well. They both talk to each other on the phone, and they talk about the possibility of this new guy being linked to the crimes committed in the first episode. Captain Stacy says that it's definitely a possibility, because they can't rule any options out at this point in the investigation. However, he does think that it might be a completely separate issue. There has been no indication that Spider-Man nor the police are anywhere close to even solving this crime or the issues set out in episode 1. Either way, Peter has got a new challenge on his hands with this Taskmaster. Captain Stacy says to keep him posted, as he's also trying to figure out the stuff from episode 1 as well. Peter says will do, and they both hang up the phone. Peter returns home battered and bruised. However, he returns to someone at his doorstep. It's Mary Jane. She says to Peter that she was wondering when he was getting home, and Peter asks what she's doing here, and she says that she was waiting for him to get home to see if he wanted to potentially go and catch a movie with her tonight. She's not got anything on, and she's finished her schoolwork. Peter says sure, and MJ says that's great. So I wanted to add a couple of scenes in here, just more developing this relationship and carrying on this storyline as well. This is going to be a big part of Season 4 and possibly going into Season 5 as well, so I want to branch this out as much as possible. Peter and MJ will go out to a movie. However, throughout this scene, MJ will start to ask Peter questions about the Bugle and his job, like, is it dangerous being around fights all the time? And how do you get there while it's still happening? Questions that are starting to dig deep into Peter's personal connection to these fights and possibly reveal his secret identity. Peter gets quite nervous that MJ is actually closing down on his secret identity, but he plays it cool. However, we'll start to see a few hints that MJ is potentially trying to pry it out of Peter. As we do know, she did find out Peter's secret identity at the end of Season 3. Also, these scenes here with MJ trying to pry Peter's secret identity out of him one way or another will actually parallel another character's motifs later on in the episode. So keep your eye open for that. We cut a little later on in the episode, in fact it will be the next day. And this is where we actually get to the title of the episode, which is Physical Education, and they will be in PE class. However, their regular gym teacher will actually be off sick, so they will have a substitute gym teacher, who goes by the name of Anthony Masters. Now, as you could probably tell, I am going to be taking very heavy inspiration from that one Ultimate Spider-Man episode where Anthony Masters was the gym teacher for Midtown High, and he was actually trying to find out who Spider-Man was by analysing the kids' skill sets. Now, I'm going to be taking a page out of that book, as Anthony Masters here, who is, by the way, Taskmaster, will have noticed that Spider-Man is in fact a kid, and his motif is to find out Spider-Man's secret identity. So by studying Spider-Man, studying his build, his voice, and his fighting style, he can pretty much determine that his age has got to be somewhere around of a teenager. Therefore, logically, Taskmaster will deduce that Spider-Man is in fact from Midtown High. So he will become the substitute gym teacher to find out who Spider-Man is. And this is where he'll put the whole class through a bunch of trials and tribulations to try and find out if any of them are actually Spider-Man. And he will go through all of the classes until he finds the right one. Anthony Masters will set out a course for all of the kids to do, with a bunch of obstacles that resemble how Spider-Man jumps and leaps over things, including ropes for them to swing on, including tires to crawl through, including walls to jump over, etc. After analysing all of the students' body types, he deduces that Peter Parker in fact has the most similar body type to Spider-Man, so makes him go first. Peter thinks at first this could be a great way to show off, especially to Flash, who have had a rivalry with each other for the longest time. However, Peter can't reveal his secret identity, so of course, will do it very half-heartedly, struggling to get up the wall, not being able to swing with the rope, etc. So inadvertently, he will avoid selection from Taskmaster, which will cause Taskmaster to go through the rest of the class, when he reaches none other than Flash Thompson. Now, just like the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon, Flash will of course try his hardest, because he is the most athletic, other than obviously Peter Parker, who can't reveal that because he is Spider-Man, and obviously he is trying to show off to all of the girls, he's trying to show off to the rest of his classmates, so of course, Flash will be then selected at the end of the day. When it's time to go home, everyone will leave school in an orderly fashion. However, Taskmaster will end up abducting Flash Thompson, as he believes that in fact he has found the person that wears the mask, and he believes Flash Thompson to be Spider-Man. But will the rest of the class become aware of Flash's disappearance? We'll just have to find out. Episode 3, Physical Education, Part 2. We start our episode where the last one left off. Flash Thompson has gone missing and no one knows where he is. It's the day after he is missing. Flash never leaves school unannounced. Randy, Kenny, Gloria, nor Sally know where he is. Peter thinks it's also weird that Flash isn't in school either. He shares his concerns with MJ as they start to walk down the corridor, and MJ says that he's probably fine. Flash, despite how stupid he can be, isn't stupid enough to get himself into any kind of trouble. This relieves the tension within Peter slightly. Ever since weird things have started to happen around the city again with the engineering house raid or Taskmaster, Peter has been on edge trying to look out for suspicious activity. He never knows when the next threat could be around the corner. And task 1 at the moment on Peter's mind is to catch Taskmaster. Peter returns home that day and starts to do some research, but he can't find anything. This guy is completely anonymous. And then Aunt May knocks on his door. He says to come in. She opens it and tells Peter that she left a grocery shop at Feast before she left last night. Is it okay if he goes and picks it up? Peter says sure, and Aunt May thanks him. She will say she left it in Mr. Lee's office as she leaves. Peter says that this could be a good time and go out and search for Taskmaster as Spider-Man, because the last time he encountered him was just randomly in the street. Peter leaves for Feast and walks through the front door. Everything seems in order. He asks one of the people where Mr. Lee's office is. They tell him it's upstairs. Peter walks up to the office and knocks on the door, calling for Mr. Lee to open the door, but he doesn't. No one seems to be present. Peter opens the door and walks inside himself, as it was unlocked. It's ominous. There are various different artifacts on the wall, weapons from old tribes, masks, armor. This seemed very out of the ordinary, and Mr. Lee didn't strike Peter as someone who would be into historical artifacts. The room was dark, with an old wooden kind of lighting that dimmed the vibrance of everything around him. The shadows were more prominent, and the dark colours were darker. Then just before he could lock eyes with the shopping, Mr. Lee enters behind him and says, "Are you okay?" in a rather serious tone. Peter turns around and says he's sorry, and Mr. Lee brightens up saying he didn't realise it was Peter. Mr. Lee confidently walked over to the shopping bag that May had left in his office, and says, "I assume you're looking for this." May said that he was coming. He hands it to Peter, and Peter says thank you, awkwardly leaving. We then cut to a room, with a spotlight in the middle lighting up none other than Flash Thompson. A man enters the room and says that he will ask him one last time. Flash says that he is not Spider-Man. Taskmaster holds up a picture from Season 2 where Flash wore the Spider-Man costume, and says this wasn't him. Flash's face drops as he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He says that was him pretending to be Spider-Man. He's not actually the real deal. Spider-Man is totally cool, he'll say. Taskmaster sighs, and says that he's going to have to take a more serious measure soon. Flash's phone starts buzzing. Taskmaster picks it up, and Flash shouts to give it back, but he doesn't. And Taskmaster looks at the screen as it says Sally Averill is calling on the front of it. He says that if he doesn't comply, then his friends will die. We then cut back to Peter, who leaves and is swinging from buildings with the shopping in his hand. He then gets a call. He lands and checks his phone. It's Sally Averill. What? Sally Averill never calls Peter. This can't be good. He picks up the phone and Sally is frantic. She says that Flash hasn't shown up for their Friday night out. They've tried to call him and text him, but he's not responding. Peter says to slow down and start from the beginning. Sally says that Flash wasn't in school, and now he isn't here. Something really bad has happened. Peter says that he's sure he's just busy or something. Sally says that Flash's idea of being busy is hanging out with them. He would never just ditch without saying anything. He's always the first one there and the last one to leave. Peter asks Sally why he's calling him, and Sally says since he takes pictures for the Bugle of Spider-Man, if he knows who he is. And Peter says he knows Spider-Man, kinda. Sally says to ask Spider-Man if he can help. Peter asks if they've called the police, and she says that they haven't. Peter says that if they're really concerned about this, then to call the police. Peter says to call him back later, and if nothing comes of it, then he'll inform Spider-Man. Sally says okay, and then puts the phone down. Peter sits there and thinks to himself that Sally is being a little dramatic. Although when you mention it, it is weird that Flash wasn't in school and then didn't show for their little get-together. Then his receiver goes off, saying there's an incident downtown. It's a kidnapping. In classic Spider-Man fashion, he swings on his way. Spider-Man arrives on the scene, to a van driving off. He thinks to himself this can't be good, so he swings towards the van, trying not to spill the shopping bag everywhere at the same time. He lands on the van and pokes his head through the window, to see none other than Taskmaster on the other side. His eyes widen as Taskmaster punches Spider-Man through the window, sending him flying. Taskmaster stops the van and steps out, saying that he found the wrong man. Spider-Man says, what the hell does that mean? And Taskmaster says that maybe his judgment wasn't as good as he initially thought, proving that there is weakness to him. They both engage in combat, with Spider-Man trying to ask why the hell Taskmaster is after him in the first place. What did he do to him? They both fight with Taskmaster, knowing Spider-Man's every skill and move, dodging and even using certain moves that are specific to Spider-Man against him. Peter notices this, and will say to himself that he's got to find a way to defeat Taskmaster without using his powers. He needs to be more unpredictable. He needs to use his environment around him to defeat him. Spider-Man starts using fire hydrants and different lampposts, pulling them, throwing various objects at Taskmaster as well, catching him off guard. This battle will rage on, with Peter being even more predictable, using his wits and his smarts against Taskmaster. This will go on until Spider-Man eventually defeats him once and for all. He webs him up and takes his weapons off him. Just before Captain Stacy and the police arrive to the scene, Spider-Man opens the doors to the back of the van to see Sally, Randy, and all of Flash's friends inside. His eyes widen. Taskmaster had Flash this whole time. We cut to a scene where Flash reunites with his friends, and a nice moment where he fangirls over Spider-Man. Spider-Man steps aside with Captain Stacy, who says that's just another day's work. Peter said he'd agree if it wasn't for the fact that he ruined his aunt's shopping in the process as well. Stacy empathizes with Peter and hands him a $20 bill and says go get her some more on him. Peter says he can't take that from him, and Stacy says that he never asks for anything in return. And with all the good he's done and all the trouble he's got him and the police out of in the last 2 years or so, he deserves this win. Peter smiles under the mask and says thank you with sincerity. No one has ever taken pity on the destruction Peter's life endures due to Spider-Man as much as Captain Stacy. Stacy leaves, and Peter stands there joyfully. Peter returns home, all wrapped up from the cold weather, wearing the hat that MJ brought him as well. He hands Aunt May the shopping, and we end the episode on a nice moment as we draw to a close. Episode 4, Recuperation, Part 1. We kick our episode off with Peter Parker swinging through the city on a casual Saturday evening. He gets a call from Captain Stacy, and he'll pick up the phone. Stacy explains to him that they may potentially have a lead on the engineering lab raid all the way back from episode 1. Peter says that that's great, and he'll meet with him soon when an explosion goes off behind him. Peter puts down the phone and frantically turns around to see a red figure in the distance. Peter swings down to it and lands facing the figure. His body slithers and crawls as he turned around. His face had sharp Spider-Man-like eyes. The figure spoke and says that they finally meet. Spider-Man looks bewildered. "Eddie?" he will remark. The figure looked like Venom, but a lot skinnier and partially red. He laughs and says no. The name is Carnage. Just before they could engage in battle, we cut away to 6 months earlier. This episode will primarily be focusing on Eddie Brock and Cletus Kasady and their characters. This will be a solo episode where we place Eddie Brock in the protagonist role of the episode, as I really want to focus in on what has been happening to this character since we last saw him in Season 2. We will follow Eddie as he is taken to Ravencroft for recuperation. And after standing trial, Eddie will have been deemed mentally ill, knowing that he needs to enter rehab. After being taken in and starting sessions, he will meet a doctor known as Dr. Kafka. Him and Dr. Kafka will become well acquainted and will become very close. Dr. Kafka will be successful with Eddie, and this portion of the episode will be showing us how far Eddie has come. He will no longer be fueled by his anger that the symbiote brought over him, and his hatred for Spider-Man and Peter Parker will have subsided. Kafka will be Eddie's best friend. Eddie will have made so much progress that Kafka would often tell Eddie that he'll be back to normal life in no time. However, occasionally during sessions, Eddie will see the man known as Cletus Kasady, who is another one of Dr. Kafka's patients. Cletus, however, is not anywhere near as empathetic or nowhere near as flexible emotionally as Eddie is. I personally think that Cletus's refusal to detach from his serial killer-like state will also provide a baseline for us to judge Eddie's transformation of character too, showing how far Eddie has come as a person since we last saw him in Season 2. We will then explore Cletus's character too. Not much about his backstory will be shown, but through the sessions that Cletus will have with Dr. Kafka and the conversations that he will engage with Eddie Brock, we will get hints that his past wasn't fruitful, and that he suffered a great deal of abuse from his father, and it will be heavily implied that he had to fend for himself growing up, which is part of the reason that he became such a monster. In a sly way, we will almost be forced to align ourselves with Cletus as well. But since this portion of the episode will primarily be focused from Eddie's perspective as the main character, Cletus will also be placed in an antagonistic role, where we do see the differences between Eddie and Cletus's character, as if there is some sort of moral and ethical divide between the two of them. Obviously, they are both there because they have done bad things. Cletus Kasady was a serial killer, and Eddie Brock, obviously, as we know from Season 2, did all of those horrible things as Venom. But we will definitely see that there is a moral and ethical divide between the two characters in the way that they act, the way that they talk, and the way that they approach relationships. We will then cut to a portion of the episode with the symbiote as it shows us what it was getting up to during the time jump. We will then see that it has taken some time to become stronger than ever, and will reproduce and create none other than the Carnage symbiote. The two stories will then collide when the Venom symbiote will relocate Eddie in Ravencroft, just as he was starting to get better. Eddie will see the symbiote and will cower in fear as to not bond with it again. Eddie says to stay away from him and to never come near him ever again. But like a moth to a flame, they will always meet. Eddie and the Venom symbiote bond once more, and Venom roars as he breaks out of his containment. Cletus sees this and his eyes light up. He asks how Eddie possessed this much power as he laughs. Venom says we will get revenge on Spider-Man as his old anger and emotions start flooding back. But then in the distance, another symbiote starts crawling towards them, red instead of fully black. Venom is confused until the symbiote informs Eddie that this is their offspring, and that they know the perfect candidate to help destroy Spider-Man. Cletus laughs maniacally as the symbiote crawls in his direction and bonds with him, creating Carnage. They will both break out of Ravencroft. The whole facility goes on lockdown as Dr. Kafka sprints towards their cells, but they are both gone. As she spends some time scanning over Eddie's cell, she sheds a tear and vows to make sure to get him back, because he was doing so well. We then cut to the start of the episode, where Carnage is tearing things apart and testing out his new powers. Cletus is ecstatic, killing people left, right and center, or at least showing the intention to, since this is a kids show after all. Spider-Man then arrives on the scene, and the same interaction is played out again as shown at the start of the episode. They both engage in battle. Carnage is stronger than Venom in every way possible. Peter wasn't ready for this fight in the slightest. Carnage uses symbiote axes and a variety of other violent weapons to try and slice Spider-Man in half. All while this is going on, Carnage is trying to hurt civilians around him too. Although the Venom and Carnage symbiote's main goals are to destroy Spider-Man at all cost, Cletus's mentality provides an extra layer of danger and substance to his character and the threat that Carnage poses. The idea that Carnage is torn between two goals makes him all the more dangerous and unpredictable. His willingness to hurt others scares Peter, as he will experience through his fight with him. Most of the villains Peter has fought has had a slight sense of remorse to others, but not Carnage. Carnage has no humanity inside of him, and this will be shown through his actions. Carnage tears Peter's suit to shreds, battering him down. The fight will be violent, the fight will be tough. Peter starts to get the upper hand slightly though, proving his experience and will as Spider-Man 4 seasons in. But just when he thought he was getting to grips with the power of Carnage, Venom enters the scene and says hello Peter. Peter, in a torn costume, begrudgingly says Eddie through his gritted teeth. Season 4 Episode 5, Recuperation Part 2. We kick off the episode where we left off in the last, Spider-Man face to face with Venom once again. Peter Parker and Eddie Brock, long-term rivals, once friends. Cletus will ask Eddie if he knows this man, and Eddie will say that he's a long-term friend and will laugh. Peter will say that this ends now as they engage in battle. We start this episode with a massive brawl between Venom, Carnage and Spider-Man. Venom was hard enough, but Carnage was on another level. He would not hold back and would have no remorse. Usually Spider-Man would have to hold back when fighting his villains, because if he didn't pull his punches, then he could potentially kill with the sheer force of his genetically enhanced powers. However, against villains such as Venom and Carnage, with the enhanced powers that the symbiote rage gives them, he could not hold back. He had to give this his all, or else they would both get the better of him. He had never moved so quick, he had never punched, kicked, or swung so hard in order to survive in his entire life. Carnage quickly tore his suit to shreds even more, with Venom aiding in the destruction. He had to get out of there. Peter looked for an escape, but every time he tried to, they would pull him straight back in. This fight would gather a lot of attention, as buildings and surrounding cars would be destroyed. Captain Stacy would arrive on the scene with the NYPD. Captain Stacy would shoot at Carnage, who held Spider-Man in his arm. And just as he was about to deliver the final blow to Spider-Man, Carnage felt bullets get absorbed into the suit. He turns and looks in Captain Stacy's direction and throws Spider-Man across the road. He picks Stacy up and creates an axe with his other hand as he laughs menacingly, before Venom shouts his way, saying that they need to focus on what's important and not to get distracted. This will moreover showcase the split ideologies between Venom and Carnage, showing Cletus' desire for destruction and chaos with no order. Venom's goals don't involve the destruction and loss of other life, but rather his goals only involve Spider-Man. Carnage begrudgingly agrees with Venom as they return to try and fight Spider-Man, but before they know it, he's gone. Before the police can enact any arrest on Venom or Carnage, they also move out to devise a new plan. We cut to Peter at the Parker household, who is beaten and bruised to the point of almost death. He collapses on his bed and falls asleep. Peter wakes up the next morning with a lot of his wounds cleared due to his increased healing factor. However, he is still very, very sore. We cut to Venom and Carnage devising a plan together on how they are going to take down Spider-Man. However, this conversation will also be a clash of personal interest too. Eddie, like Peter, has people that he cares for and has people that he loves. This scene will also show that Eddie's personality has almost bonded with the Venom suit in a symbiotic relationship in a similar way to how they have bonded physically. The Venom symbiote may have enhanced the rageful side of Eddie Brock, but the loving and caring side of Eddie has also influenced the symbiote's personality, and this will shine through here as well. On the other hand, Carnage is on the opposite spectrum to both of them and loves his new sense of power, wanting to cause outrage and chaos with it. Cletus and Carnage will be on exactly the same page. Venom will tell him that that's not his purpose. His purpose is to help him kill Spider-Man, and that is final, not to hurt innocent civilians. Carnage disagrees and asks Venom to try and stop him as he laughs. This turns into a brawl between the two of them, and Venom engages in battle with Carnage. At first, Venom will get the upper hand, managing to hold Carnage down with his experience. However, after a short while, Carnage will start to come out on top, as his sheer strength and power will seep through. Venom will be heavily injured. Carnage, before leaving, will say that Venom needs to lighten up a little, and will give a menacing grin as he escapes into the day. We cut to Dr. Kafka, who was doing some research looking back on the TV footage when Spider-Man fought both Venom and Carnage, and realizes that maybe Spider-Man will know a thing or two about where Eddie has gone. After some further research, she will come to discover that Peter Parker used to regularly take pictures of Spider-Man for the Daily Bugle. During school hours, Peter will be asked to go to the principal's office. As he leaves, both MJ and Gwen will glance his way, as if they are distracted by him. During this moment, Gwen will look over to MJ, and will notice this, and will raise an eyebrow, confused slightly. We will cut to Peter as he enters the principal's office, and the principal says that there is someone here that needs to speak with you very urgently. It turns out it's Dr. Kafka. Kafka explains the situation, and Peter remarks that he doesn't know why everyone would assume he knows Spider-Man just because he takes pictures of him, and Kafka says that she is desperate. She needs to know where Eddie is, so if she knows anything about Spider-Man or where he is or who he is, to help her. She says that she can break through to him, she can break through to Eddie Brock. Peter thinks to himself that Spider-Man and Kafka could be the key to maybe getting Eddie back. Peter reluctantly agrees to find Spider-Man, saying that he has some connection to him. Because Peter knows that he can't face Venom and Carnage alone, he needs something on his side. Spider-Man needs to rely on something other than his own strength and agility to get him through this battle. Peter leaves the office. We cut to the end of the school day as Peter leaves the building. Gwen walks up behind him as Peter slips on the hat that MJ had bought him for Christmas. She awkwardly taps him on the shoulder. Peter turns around and gulps. Gwen says that she just needs to talk. Peter says that's okay. She says she doesn't know why he's ignoring her. She says that maybe it was because he thought it was wrong because of what happened with Harry or something along those lines, but she thinks that it's something different. Peter asks, what does she think that is? And then Gwen says that she's going to be completely honest with him. She asks him if it's something to do with Mary Jane. Peter says, of course it isn't. Gwen is frustrated and shouts at Peter, asking, what is it then? Why has he been ignoring her? They were this close to getting together, and Gwen is just upset. They were friends, and they can't even be friends anymore. But why? Peter struggles to find the words. He says he can't tell her. He wish he could, but he can't. And just before Peter could muster an excuse, MJ approaches the situation. She bounces in and links arms with Peter in a flirty manner, and says hi to both of them in an upbeat and positive way. MJ asks Peter if he's walking back to Aunt May's because she could walk with him. Gwen frowns and a slight tear wells up in her eye. She says that he wished he just told her. She runs off home, and MJ looks bewildered as Peter looks on. She questions Peter as to what's going on. Peter says that it's nothing. MJ backs away slightly, not as intimate as before, and says that she wasn't aware. She says that she's sorry if she got in the way of anything. Peter says that you haven't, frantically trying to calm the situation down. And MJ says to Peter very calmly he needs to chase after her, as she walks off in the other direction, leaving Peter alone by himself. Peter places his face in his hands, remarking that nothing can ever go his way, and of course, at the center of it all is Spider-Man. MJ walks off home, wondering if she actually knew everything about Peter that she thought. She knows that he's Spider-Man, but what other secrets does he hold? Peter decides that he needs to take his mind off it. He switches into a makeshift Spider-Man suit that he has made since the other one got torn to shreds, and decides to go and meet Dr. Kafka. Once arriving on the scene, Dr. Kafka reveals all to Spider-Man, saying how she knew Eddie and Cletus, saying that Eddie especially was a really good man. She managed to break through to Eddie and managed to get him out of the mindset of rage and destruction, but now he's back. He has the symbiote again, and she believes that she can break through to him because they got really close. However, she doesn't believe that there is any hope for Cletus, which is what makes him so dangerous. But Eddie is a kind soul, and is misguided by the hurtful rage that the symbiote bestows upon him. The rest of the episode will be Spider-Man and Dr. Kafka working together to track down Venom and Carnage, and Venom trying to track down Carnage as he slowly realizes the severity of what he has let loose on the city. Eventually, Spider-Man and Dr. Kafka will come to blows with Carnage, as the destruction he starts to cause becomes apparent on the news. Spider-Man will get a call from Captain Stacy too, informing him of the situation at hand. Spider-Man will arrive on the scene with Dr. Kafka as well. They both ask where Venom is, and Carnage says that he doesn't care about Venom. Spider-Man, knowing the severity of what Carnage can bring, tells Dr. Kafka to get out of there. It is not safe. But Kafka refuses, saying that she needs to break through to Venom. She needs to know where he is. Dr. Kafka, despite not believing in his recuperation, tries to also break through to Cletus in this moment as well, saying that he needs to stop this destruction. But Cletus is at one with the Carnage symbiote. They are forever bonded. And then out of nowhere, Venom arrives on the scene, tracking Carnage down as well. Spider-Man turns to Venom with a serious, stern look. Dr. Kafka reaches out to him and screams his name. Spider-Man telling Kafka once again not to go near him. This isn't the Eddie Brock that you once knew. Venom, however, isn't hostile to either of them. Rather, turns his attention to Carnage, completely ignoring Spider-Man. He says that it was a mistake letting him loose on the city, and that Venom needs to destroy him at any cost. Once again, furthering the idea that Eddie and the symbiote have a mutual symbiotic relationship that bonds both of their personalities. Carnage says that they need to be taught a lesson. In life, there is chaos, there is destruction, and just like Spider-Man, he has become blind to the inevitable world that they live in. Carnage picks up Dr. Kafka and laughs. Venom roars out in anger as Carnage creates an axe with his other hand. Venom leaps at Carnage with rage. Since his spider sense can't detect the symbiotes, Spider-Man doesn't really realize the severity of the situation until it's too late. After a few moments, Peter also leaps at Carnage as well, trying to save Dr. Kafka, but it's too late, as Carnage delivers the final blow to her, killing her in front of Eddie and Peter. Carnage laughs as the Venom mask retracts from Eddie's face as he holds the Doctor in his arms one last time. Episode 6, Recuperation, Part 3. We continue our story where we left off. Eddie holds Kafka in his arms for the very last time as he cries over her body. Carnage jumps away into the night as Peter looks to chase him, but turns back to Eddie. The pain he's felt once before, reminiscing the time that he held his Uncle Ben in his arms as he died. Peter puts his hand on Eddie's shoulder. He tells him it'll be okay. In a rage, fueled by the hateful emotions of the symbiote, Eddie lashes out, flinging Peter back. He stands up as he jumps away and web swings in the direction that Carnage left in. This situation couldn't get any worse for Peter, as he'll think to himself, but it just did. Just like the first part in this three-parter, this part will heavily focus on Eddie Brock and his story, as I feel like since this is one of the only opportunities we're going to get to see his character again, it's only right that he gets the majority of the attention in this episode. Therefore, in this episode, we will be focusing on Eddie and his character, as well as also focusing on Peter Parker as well. We will cut to a scene with Eddie as he's reminiscing over the times he had spent with Dr. Kafka. We will also put a heavy essence on flashbacks as well to represent their relationship that they had with each other, to hit home that this death hurt Eddie more than you could ever think even further. I really want the audience to connect with Eddie and be on his side during this time. Eddie will slowly come to the realization that Carnage, his creation, was his own undoing. Carnage is the reason why Dr. Kafka is dead. If he wasn't so adamant on getting revenge on Spider-Man, none of this would have happened, and someone that he loved died because of it. During this time, Eddie will almost parallel Peter's responsibility arc from before the show even started, going through his own version of that classic Spider-Man story. He realizes that taking Carnage down is the next and only thing he has to do. He must kill Cletus Kasady. We then cut to a scene with Captain Stacy and Spider-Man discussing the situation. Peter will say that Eddie was close with Dr. Kafka from what he gathered. Captain Stacy will look down, sad almost. As forensics investigate the scene, Stacy will look up and tell Peter that this is exactly why he can't be close with his daughter. Peter's eyes widen. He was afraid of this conversation, afraid that this day would finally come. Stacy explains that Gwen has been down lately, and she won't really tell him why, until he realized she stopped seeing you. He will tell Peter how she used to mention him all the time, until recently. He will go on to say how Gwen hasn't really been herself either, and then it clicked. Stacy will tell Peter that since the day that he knew his identity, Peter has distanced himself from Gwen because he doesn't want her to get hurt. And he will tell Peter that he admires that. He admires the courage to stay out of her personal life. He uses this example of Dr. Kafka's death and the impact that it had on Eddie Brock, as an example and a first-hand warning as to what could happen to Gwen if she ever got tied up in this. Captain Stacy says that he doesn't care about what happens to him, as long as Gwen is alright. That's the only thing that matters to him. Peter will look down, remembering from the other day when he couldn't bring himself to tell Gwen or MJ about how he truly feels. But Captain Stacy is right. On his way home, Peter tries to shake off what Captain Stacy told him, but he can't. Either way, those feelings he has locked up inside will have to wait. They will have to subside until they finally catch Venom and Carnage. After a few more scenes intertwining Eddie's story and grief along with Peter trying to track down Carnage and Venom, we will be led to the final battle, where Carnage is causing a riot, hurting people left, right and center, just as is his chaotic nature. And wherever Carnage is, Venom will follow. Venom confronts Carnage on the scene. We will get a rageful interaction between the two. Venom is furious that Carnage killed Dr. Kafka. He will say that we will kill you, and Carnage will simply laugh and say that he would like to see him try. Venom and Carnage will jump at each other before Spider-Man can arrive on the scene. Shortly after, Captain Stacy will also arrive on the scene as well. Spider-Man jumps straight into the fight. During a quiet moment in the battle, Venom and Spider-Man hesitantly decide to put aside their differences to help take down Carnage as he needs to be stopped. He is too powerful for them individually. They need to help each other. However, the fight is brutal, as buildings are destroyed and cars are set alight around them. It is the most destructive battle since the Green Goblin fight in Season 2. Spider-Man during the brawl, along with Captain Stacy and a few others, will be saving civilians around the blocks, as to not be crushed by the rubble. However, as Carnage and Venom rip straight through the side of a building, a little girl finds herself underneath some falling rubble. Spider-Man, focused as ever, is trying to catch and take out Carnage as well. Captain Stacy, out the corner of his eye, notices her. He rushes over to save her, leaping with pride, wearing the badge with honor, thinking about what would happen if this was his daughter in this situation, calling back to that conversation he had with Peter earlier. Peter's spider sense goes off. It's painfully loud within his head. He turns around to see what could possibly be setting it off, and in front of him, Captain Stacy pushes a little girl to safety and is crushed by some falling debris in the process. Whilst Venom carries on fighting Carnage, Peter web zips over to Stacy, frantically trying to pull him out of the rubble. Meanwhile, with Venom and Carnage, Venom finally defeats Carnage and relieves him of the symbiote, completing his story. Venom catches the Carnage symbiote and decides to kill Cletus in the process, saying that was for Kafka. However, with Spider-Man, he pulls Captain Stacy from the rubble and holds him in his arms. He asks him to wake up, but there is nothing from him. Peter screams for him to wake up, but still nothing. He holds his head down as Captain Stacy lay dead in his arms. He instantly thinks to himself, what will Gwen think? What will Gwen do? Peter wasn't there to save him, as more death and destruction follows Peter Parker's sorrowful life. And we end the episode there. Episode 7, Psychology 101. Broken, Spider-Man lay over Captain Stacy's body. He felt something that he hadn't felt since that torrid day. The day that Uncle Ben died. This was the first major setback, the first major death that affects the life of Peter Parker since Uncle Ben. Peter sobs over his body. Every thought runs through his head. We cut. Rain pours. The city gathers around a funeral as Gwen Stacy and her mother places a flower down on George Stacy's grave. Gwen can't bring herself to say a word in front of the world that is watching. Rather, Jean DeWolf steps up to the stage, the new captain of the NYPD. She will say bravery, heart, courage, and belief were all attributes of George Stacy. He was a good man, and moreover, a father. The whole city appeared to celebrate the life of one of the greatest men to ever grace the surface of New York. But no sign of Peter Parker, only Spider-Man, who sat above the church, watching on. Even though he was acquainted through his identity, Captain Stacy didn't know Peter Parker. He knew Spider-Man. I guess that's what happens when Peter's identity is revealed. The man behind the mask merges into one. He no longer is Peter Parker for the people around him, but Spider-Man. The pressure to live up to the entity, which is the superhero that looks out for everyone, emerges. Which is why people like Gwen can never know. People like Aunt May can never know. Peter will always be Spider-Man. But for the people that know who he is, will always be the ones that pay. Spider-Man knows this. The scene loathes on for a moment. Peter scrunches his eyes. He looks to his left, however, and out of the corner of his eye, he spots something in the trees. The dark figure looks suspicious, almost looking in Spider-Man's direction. Spider-Man leaps towards the tree. The man had white hair and a blue jacket. Peter thought that was weird. He eerily looked like Captain Stacy as he ran off before Peter could catch him. Peter thinks to himself that he must be going insane. After everything that's happened, he needs to take a step back. He's starting to imagine things. We cut to the Watson household, catching up with Mary Jane Watson. At this point in the series, we don't know much about her character, but this scene will show us a little bit more of her. She will be looking at photos of her mother, her and her father from when she was a kid. She is cycling through them, ripping her father out of them by tearing them up, just leaving her and her mother behind. A tear will slightly roll down her cheek, until Anna Watson will call Mary Jane for dinner. She will make her way downstairs, and will have a heartfelt scene with her aunt. Anna will know something is up with MJ, but MJ won't fold. She keeps everything bottled up inside. MJ diverts from the subject itself, and will start talking about something else that is playing on her mind. She thinks back to the end of the events that happened in Season 3, when she found out that Peter Parker was Spider-Man. The fact that she knows has been eating her up inside. She will ask her aunt what would she do in a situation if she knew something about somebody that she probably shouldn't know, and if she should tell them or not. Anna will ask how bad the thing is that she knows. MJ says it's not a bad thing, she's just afraid of the consequences, because they could be rather detrimental. Anna says that she trusts MJ's judgment. She's a great judge of character and a great person at heart. She should do whatever she needs to do. We cut back to Peter, who is sitting by himself on top of his roof. He flicks through his phone to see Gwen's contact. He's in a battle with himself. He shouldn't. He knows he shouldn't. He promised Captain Stacy. But she's going through it right now. This is the time where she would need Peter the most. As her friend first and foremost, he clicks the name and clicks the message button. He types a message, saying he's sorry about everything that's happened, and if she needs to talk, he's always there for her. He sends the message and instantly gets a reply. She says that she needs to see him. We cut to later that night where Peter meets up with Gwen. No words are said. He hugs her, but she hugs him tighter. She says that she needed to see him. Peter asks how she's doing, and Gwen says that's a stupid question. An awkward patch follows as Peter thinks to himself that this is a bad idea on every level, but at the end of the day, he's looking out for Gwen as a friend. Nothing more. Gwen says that it hurts, and Peter will ask what. Gwen will say that she knew that one day that this would happen, and that one day she would see him leave and never come back. Peter won't know what to say, other than he knows how it feels. He'll say that his Uncle Ben died in a similar way, and he could have never been prepared for how that made him feel. He'll go on to say that the best thing to do is to keep your head high, and to carry on like they would have wanted us to do. Gwen will say he's right. And Gwen will go on to say that this city, and everything in it, it's all a bit much sometimes. Peter will nod in agreement. She'll say, however, the one thing throughout her life that has always been there for her, no matter how bad things have gotten, or how crazy her life can be, it's Peter Parker. And recently, that's been different. Things have changed. Peter looks down. She knows that she's fighting a losing battle with both of them. And whatever it is, she hopes that he figures it out. But she wants that connection to remain. She doesn't want Peter Parker to not be there for her when she needs him the most. And she wants it the other way around as well. She wants Peter to know that when he feels like he needs a shoulder to cry on, that she can be there for him too. She holds her hand out to him and says no matter what, can we at least say friends? Peter will be slightly taken back by this, but will be relieved at the same time. He shakes her hand and agrees. We cut to a more positive, upbeat montage, where Peter makes his new Spider-Man suit, replacing the old homemade suit. He puts it on and goes out for a swing for some fresh air. It's Sunday, and Monday everything resumes back to normal. This might be his last chance to have a little bit of freedom. He gets a call from Aunt May, asking if he's able to drop her bus pass off at the feast centre because she forgot it, and needs to get home, and Peter says of course, he'll be there as soon as he can. But once again, out of the corner of his eye, just like he saw at the funeral, he sees a figure that scarily looks like Captain Stacy. Peter thinks that's weird, and swings down to see what's going on. To nothing, once again, the figure has disappeared. Peter says to himself that he's seeing things. It's like Venom all over again. Peter swings a few more times, until a store bell rings. He swings down to check out what's going on. It's another engineering firm that's being robbed, calling back to what happened in episode 1. All the lights are out, and Peter looks around saying for his spidey sense to not fail him now. And right on cue, it buzzes rampantly as he backflips out of a way of a white streak that glazes across the room. Spider-Man lands and looks up to a glowing white figure staring him down. the man says that he knew this day would come in a distorted voice. Spider-Man will say, out of all the superpowered bad guys he's faced, you seem like one of the strangest. He'll say that his powers don't even make sense. Annoyed, the man blasts Spider-Man across the room. He gets up, and the man says, you're annoying as everyone said. Spider-Man says, who? He will think to himself, first Taskmaster, and now this. Where are all these guys getting the know-how from? He jumps around, dodging all the man's attacks, before he gets shot across the room and into the wall. The figure picks up some tech and escapes into the night. Spider-Man tries to follow him, but he's escaped. He looks out to the busy New York street, but his glowing white figure can't be seen anywhere. If his powers can be turned on and off, he could be any one of these people, Peter will think to himself. Whatever that was, Peter has to keep an eye out. But first, Aunt May's bus pass. Peter will arrive at the feast center and drop off her bus pass. She will thank Peter. Peter will look up to Mr. Lee's office as he shuts the blinds closed. Something seems off as Peter's spider sense tingles slightly. Peter will ask May if everything's okay with Mr. Lee. She says he's been off today, but she's sure it's nothing. Peter asks if he's been like this before. May says sometimes, but it's a sensitive topic for him. Peter will ask why, in what way. May will tell Peter that Mr. Lee has had a dark past. He gets depressive episodes. His wife and son were killed in an unfortunate accident a few years back, but he doesn't like talking about it. Peter's suspicion turns to empathy as Captain Stacy plays on his mind once again. We will cut to that night as Peter tries to get some sleep. As he closes his eyes, we get flashbacks of Captain Stacy's death playing over and over again in his head. The moment won't subside. It won't go away. All the memories he had with Captain Stacy, from back in Season 1 all the way to the reveal of Peter's identity in Season 3, will be played in this moment. This moment will act as not just a representation of Peter's emotional state during this time, but a celebration of the Captain Stacy character. Peter will wake up the next morning and will meet Aunt May in the kitchen. Aunt May will mention how he's been very distant with Mary Jane recently. Have them two fallen out or something, she will ask? And Peter will remember what happened a few days ago, and his eyes widen, thinking to himself that he's got to resolve that situation. Peter will think to himself that that one person who, when he's with, everything goes away, is Mary Jane. She's the one person over the last couple of months that he can really just be himself around, and he doesn't want to lose that. We then cut to a secure location. A familiar voice can be heard in the background, saying that the boss is impressed. Breaking Spider-Man down psychologically is working. We pan to none other than Captain Stacy, who smirks sinisterly. He lifts up his hand and rips his face off to reveal the chameleon underneath. The familiar voice carries on talking, and none other than Hammerhead steps out from behind the shadows. Gone since Tombstone's criminal empire had fell, but risen has the remains under a new force. A force that wants nothing more than to destroy Spider-Man. Another familiar voice can be heard in the background too, saying sorry he's late to the meeting. He just had a little skirmish that he had to take care of, as none other than Martin Lee reveals himself. He says he's acquired the tech that the boss required. Hammerhead, who appears to be the orchestrator in all this, says good. Spider-Man won't know what will hit him. We cut back to Peter. He goes to visit MJ. He rings the doorbell and she answers. MJ will be a little blunt at first. She will say to Peter that he needs to make his mind up about what he wants, because he's hurting more than one person. Peter's eyes will widen. He will ask her what she means by that. MJ will scowl almost and say that he knows exactly what it means, if it wasn't obvious before. The scene will hold for a moment as they stare at each other. MJ had never been in such a vulnerable situation such as this before, as a facade put up for most of the time had been broken down. This one boy stood in front of her, makes her feel things that she has never felt before. Panicked, she tells him the absolute truth. Peter, I know you're Spider-Man. Cut to black. We will get a little stinger at the end of this episode, however. We return to the start of the episode. However, this time, it's from the perspective of Venom. He has just stabbed Cletus Kasady, ending the saga. As the police arrive on the scene, he jumps away into the night. Venom will return very, very soon. Episode 8. Frontlines. We kick off this episode a few days after MJ revealed to Peter that she knew he was Spider-Man. MJ is frantically running around a building, collapsing above her. She dodges out of the way of falling rubble. We then cut to a POV of Spider-Man. Peter narrates over the top about how this was a really bad idea. And out of nowhere, a stream of sand blasts Peter in the back, sending him flying across the room. Sandman forms out of the sand particles and stands over Peter as he says he's a dead man. Peter, currently down and injured, widens his eyes as Sandman approaches him. After the intro, we cut back to a few days earlier, however, still one day after MJ revealed that she knew Peter was Spider-Man. Peter, MJ, Anna Watson and Aunt May are all at the dinner table eating. MJ and Peter keep looking at each other and looking away. Things seem tense, but not in the sense that she knew he was Spider-Man. It was a different kind of tension. May says that her, Anna Watson and Mary Jane are going to Coney Island in a few days. He should come. Peter says sure. We cut to Peter in school. He hops from class to class nervously. Everywhere he goes, he sees MJ or Gwen. He can't shake the conversation they had after she revealed he knew his identity. What could that be? This week at Midtown is the induction week for the military. The whole theme of this episode will revolve around military application. This episode, alongside the Peter and Mary Jane story, will also focus on Flash Thompson, who during this time becomes interested in the application. Since Season 2, throughout the couple of times that I have mentioned the character, he will have matured a lot since then. Since winning the football trophy in Season 3 legitimately after Harry got exposed for using, his character has come a long way. We will also touch upon the back and forth relationship he has with Sean, addressing that this has been going on for a year now, similar to the situation Peter finds himself in with Gwen. Sean's personality has always appeared disinterested in Flash. However, when Flash will apply for the military in this episode, Sean will be slightly down about it, not wanting him to go, implying that she may see a potential future with him. The decision will come about when Flash decides that after the constant attempts to bring his grades up fail, he must join the army. He needs the experience, and he's got to start somewhere. Academics has never really been for him anyway. It is revealed that the characters that applied will be leaving at the end of the school year. We cut to after class. Peter leaps to the top of a building. First order of business. He needs to find out who the glowing magic guy was, and why he stole what he stole. He thinks back to Captain Stacy, and will say to himself that it's a lot harder being solo than he remembers. He has to figure all this out on his own. We then cut to Hammerhead, who is recruiting villainous members to help him take down Spider-Man. He tells Chameleon and Mr. Negative that he has one old foe in mind that could send Spider-Man a run for his money. Enter Flint Marko. Flint arrives on the scene with a facial expression of anger. He asks Hammerhead what the hell he wants, and Hammerhead will say that he wants him to bring in Spider-Man. Flint will remark that that didn't go well the first few times he tried to do that. Plus, he's over all that now. He's been changing his life around. Since the episode during Season 2, where Flint helped save people from the fire on the oil tanker, he has decided to turn his life around. Not just for his sake, but for his daughter too. He doesn't want anything to do with Spider-Man. Hammerhead will say he has no choice, and pulls up a recording of thugs holding his daughter and some of his extended family hostage. Flint, enraged, lashes out at Hammerhead, sending him across the room. Mr. Negative charges up and zaps Sandman back into human form. Hammerhead gets up and brushes his waistcoat. He says he didn't think he'd have the best response, but he will comply, or his family will perish. We cut away to Aunt May, Anna Watson, MJ and Peter at Coney Island together. The tension between Peter and MJ is still there, as we flash back to the end of last episode to reveal what the conversation was. MJ says that she knows Peter is Spider-Man. Peter laughs and says that's nonsense, and MJ says that she's serious. She knows. Peter asks how she got to that conclusion. The events from Season 3 play over again. She speaks Peter through how she saw him put on the costume and swing away. Peter scrambles to come up with an excuse, and MJ says there's no point of denying it. She had to get it off her chest. It was eating her up inside. She couldn't hold on to it for any longer. We cut back to the present day, as Peter and MJ walk around Coney Island, still tensely looking at one another. When screaming can be heard from the background, Peter and MJ instantly swiftly turn around to see a massive hole breach through the side of the dock. Peter thinks to himself there is no way Sandman is back to his old ways. As a stream of sand swiftly makes its way through the hole, Peter tells everyone to wait here as he runs off, saying he's going to go get help. Spider-Man swings onto the scene and asks how many times they've fought now to Flint. Marko will say he's already bugging him and he's only just opened his mouth. Spider-Man will say that's what he's best at as he dodges out of the way. Sandman then looks around him as he sees people screaming. He can't let any of these people get hurt. He needs to lure Spider-Man away. He grabs the closest person to him, which is MJ. He takes her off the island and onto an abandoned building to get Spider-Man's attention. Peter screams her name as he web zips towards Sandman. Flint puts MJ down safely and lets her go, as he begins to fight Spider-Man. But MJ can't find an escape. The doors are locked, and due to them fighting, the building starts to collapse around them. Which is where we return to the first scene in the episode, as Sandman looms over Spider-Man. They begin to brawl again, and as they are fighting, Peter and MJ catch each other's eyes as we flashback once more. This time, a few moments after the reveal, They both sit inside Anna Watson's house. This will be a big scene for the series, as MJ reveals a lot about herself. Peter will say that she can't tell anyone about this. This is serious. His identity is the one thing he'll always be stern about. MJ says that she knows how much it means to him. She's been watching his selflessness, saving people, giving up for others when they need it. The need to hide his other half from the rest of the world for people's safety is what she respects the most, but intrigues her because she thought she was the only one. Peter will be confused and will ask, what? MJ will say the reason that she doesn't live with her parents anymore is because of her father. Her father used to abuse her mother, and her Aunt Anna doesn't know how bad it really got. She keeps that secret part of her life away from her aunt because she doesn't want her to get hurt. Anna's brother, who is MJ's father, is in prison now, but it's a big secret. MJ tells Peter she's been living with this part of her life for years, and all she does is put on a brave face to act like everything's okay, like she's the chillest person in the room. However, deep inside, she has the most chaotic mind. Peter is taken back by this and says he's sorry for what happened to her and her mother. MJ will say it's fine, she just thought that he should know. Peter holds her hand as MJ places her head on Peter's chest. Peter embraces it into a hug. They pull away, and as they lock eyes, and without thinking, they kiss. It felt natural, in the moment, but MJ pulls away. She says she's sorry, she shouldn't have done that. Peter, stunned, sits there bewildered. MJ says that she knows that he loves Gwen, and Gwen loves him too. She couldn't do that, not to Gwen, not after everything she's lost. Peter says in a somber tone that because of Spider-Man, he can't love Gwen. He can never love anyone. MJ says that's not fair. That's not his choice to make. And Peter looks down. We cut back to the fight with Sandman. The somber tone plays over the fight as Peter finally brings Sandman down. However, the building is still collapsing. Peter rushes MJ out of there before the building fully comes down. But in that time, Sandman escapes into the night. At least everyone is okay. Peter stands face to face with MJ in his costume. He says that's why he can never love anyone. Situations like that, he couldn't put the ones he loves on the front lines. Fade to black. Episode 9. Breaking and Entering. We begin our episode with Peter slumped over his chair. He is looking through some chemistry notes for class, but they all start to go blurry. Everything is getting a little bit too much for him at the moment. He doesn't know what to do with himself. He has a lot on his plate. He has to live up to Captain Stacy's word and his loyalty to the city that he needs to protect. He also has class, which seems like the least of his worries, but with big finals coming up at the end of the academic year, he's not going to want to miss them, or else things could get a lot worse for Peter Parker. Peter will also get flashes of George's death once again, just like he has the last couple of episodes, paranoid if it were to happen to anyone else close to him ever again. We cut to the Daily Bugle, where we see J. Jonah Jameson and all of the staff. He is ready to print a story. Recently, the Bugle's ratings have fallen. After the rise of Captain Stacy's partnership with Spider-Man before his death, public perception of Spider-Man has risen, giving fall to Jameson's #1 selling point, which was to slander his name. Jameson had been tipped off as to a potential prison break going down at Rikers Island. He sees this as an opportunity to break a story. Robbie Robertson urges Jameson not to, as if this is an ongoing investigation, it most likely is a case that shouldn't be disturbed. Jonah will say it's nonsense, and will say that they're printing it anyway. They need a good story. They already had to lay off employees, even Peter hasn't gotten any work recently. Robbie is unsure, and will share his concerns with Betty and a bunch of other staff, but Jonah prints the paper anyway. We cut to Hammerhead's office. He says that the new big man and his boss, whose identity currently remains a secret, says that this tip-off about a massive Rikers Island breakout could be a massive opportunity not only to expand their allies, but to stir chaos in the city. The Chameleon, Sandman, Mr. Negative have already deterred the Webhead on a few occasions. It's now time for things to get real hefty, and Spider-Man is going to be in trouble. We cut to Midtown High as word of the breakout around the city is spread like wildfire. All of Peter's classmates and teachers are worried. MJ will approach Peter in between periods and ask him if this is something he should be looking into. Peter will look confused as he looks at MJ with dark circles under his eyes. She comments on how tired he looks. Peter will say that he's just studying for finals. MJ will be caught off guard by how normal Peter's problems still are, despite him being Spider-Man. After this moment, she will hand him the newspaper. Peter will say that this is not good. He will think back to everything that has happened since episode 1, with the break-in at the engineering firm, his fight with the glowing magic man, Sandman, and a few other things. Something is coming. Something big is coming. But he doesn't know what it is. Everything seems a little bit too out of place. Everything a little bit too out of order. And he needs to get to the bottom of it. Not just for himself, not just for the city, but for the people he loves. For the people around him. For MJ. For Aunt May. For Gwen. MJ will ask Peter if they need to be worried. And Peter says that it'll be fine. He'll look into it. MJ will tell Peter to be careful. However, before Peter could leave, he'll run into Gwen. They will have a catch-up in the hallway, and Gwen will ask him if he wants to hang out and catch up after school. Since they're trying to strictly remain friends, why not grab a coffee together or something? Peter says sure. She says to meet him after school, and Peter says that's fine. All he has to do is skip a few classes, investigate this supposed rumour, and then meet with Gwen. What could go wrong? We cut to the rest of the episode where Peter is trying to figure out the rumour that is spread through the streets of New York, leaving a distasteful dread over the city. Spider-Man will arrive at an NYPD station, and will come into contact with Jean DeWolf, the new police captain of the NYPD. She won't be at all impressed to see him. They'll go back and forth, and she will say to him that she was never really a big fan of him, but since George saw him as an ally, she will do the same. But it doesn't necessarily mean she'll take the same liberties with Spider-Man as Captain Stacy once did. Spider-Man will ask her if she's looking into this rumour about a potential breakout of Rikers Island. She will say that the rumours are just rumours, but very serious accusations, and her best people are working on it. She will tell Spider-Man that she's not willing to discuss them any further with him. However, Peter is determined. A side of him that we rarely see comes out. Peter is stern, almost paranoid-like of anything happening like it did to Captain Stacy ever again. Spider-Man is the only person on the face of the planet capable of having any chance against those guys if they are to escape. He's the one who put them in there, and he's the only one who could put them back. He says Captain Stacy would know what's right. Jean DeWolf, almost annoyed at the blackmail, does understand Spider-Man's frustration and determination. She will say that she admires his good heart, and his intentions come from the right place, but by the book, she can't share any information. She apologizes to Spider-Man as he swings away frantically and annoyed. Spider-Man swings through the city rapidly, saying that if she won't tell him anything, he'll find out for himself. He arrives at the prison and manages to sneak past the guards. Spider-Man will find himself in a long corridor, but something feels off, until suddenly he falls into a pit full of green and purple monsters attacking him from all angles. They don't trigger his spider sense, however, which is weird. He stops for a moment as a massive snake phases through his body. He squints his eyes. Mysterio, he'll say to himself. The whole room around him will transform back to normal, and Mysterio will appear in front of him. He will say that he wasn't expecting Spider-Man so soon, but it's almost certainly a welcome surprise to see his old foe. Spider-Man will ask what is going on, and Mysterio will say it's none of his business. They will engage in combat, with Mysterio throwing all sorts of tricks his way. Spider-Man will ask if this has anything to do with the rumoured prison break that is meant to be happening. Mysterio will laugh, and he says he has no idea what he's on about. Police will become aware of Mysterio in Spider-Man's fight, as Spider-Man looks to beat Mysterio. However, during the fight, a piece of Mysterio's illusion tech will fall into one of the cells. A dark figure stands up to approach the fallen piece of tech. It's none other than the infamous Shocker himself, Montana. Mysterio is eventually defeated, and Spider-Man is assured of himself that the prison break has been avoided. Jean DeWolf will arrive on the scene and will say even though she doesn't approve of his antics, he did potentially stop a massive prison break from occurring, and for that, she is grateful. Mysterio is locked back up, and his suit is taken away from him. Spider-Man will once again feel tense. He gets permission to check the whole prison just in case. Permission is granted, and he swings around the prison visiting old prison cells with some of his greatest foes. Matt Gargan, Puma, Tombstone, and many others. Spider-Man will stop at Tombstone's cell for a moment, and they will lock eyes. The first time they will have seen each other since the gang warfare episode in Season 2. Spider-Man will say very sternly that this all better not be him, because he better prepare to go down if so. Tombstone looks up at Spider-Man and smiles. He says it's not him, because if it was, Spider-Man would already be dead. He says to Spider-Man that something is coming, something big. Spider-Man will ask if he knows anything, and Tombstone says that he has sources as he lays back down on his bed and puts his feet up. Peter, knowing that Tombstone won't crack, decides to visit one last place, the holding cell of Walter Hardy, the man that killed Uncle Ben. He looks at him as he rests. He doesn't say anything though, just stares in his direction. Spider-Man feels relieved, almost. He's still there. The man that killed Uncle Ben didn't escape. Worry over, right? We then cut to Gwen, who is waiting in a coffee shop for Peter. Peter meets her there, and her eyes light up. They sit down together, and they catch up, talk about everything. Gwen still says that the death of her father weighs on her, and every corner she turns, her father could be there. New York City is like a curse for her, hanging over her head. Peter empathizes with Gwen, but while this is going on, the moment is interrupted by explosions among the background noise of the traffic. Peter side-eyes the street next to him as people start screaming. Peter's spider sense alerts him as a piece of rubble from above him starts falling right towards where Peter, Gwen, and a few others were sat. Peter gasps as we cut. 30 minutes earlier, we fade back to the prison cell where Walter Hardy sat. In a swift motion, Walter fades away, leaving a purple and green mist behind. All along, Walter Hardy was another trick, another illusion of the mighty Mysterio. What could possibly have gone wrong? Episode 10, Secrets. We kick off this episode from inside Riker's prison. We cut to Montana's cell, where he holds the piece of tech that got ripped from Mysterio's suit in the previous episode. He fiddles around with it for a bit, until he makes himself disappear using Mysterio's cloaking mechanism. Guards walk past his cell, and realize that he's missing. They break open the cell, when Montana punches them both, knocking them out. He uses their keycards to unlock other cells, and when the other officers around the prison realize the extent as to what's happening, most of the villains have already been set free. The lockdown mode is too late to be engaged, as the villains have run rampant throughout the prison. Quentin Beck, Montana, Ox, Fancy Dan, Puma, Matt Gargan, Rhino, Silvermane, Vulture, and of course, Dr. Otto Octavius. However, as the commotion unfolds, Tombstone remains seated in his prison cell and puts his feet up and smiles. It's all come crashing down. He knows there's nothing left for him outside the prison. Why not instead watch the world burn? We cut to Peter and Gwen. As the explosions around them can be heard, we're cut up to the end of the last episode as the rubble is falling onto Peter and Gwen. Peter's frozen in time. He could either move Gwen out of the way, but risk the lives of the others around him, or reveal his identity to the one person who shouldn't know, and save the other people too. Ultimately, with great power comes great responsibility, and the overwhelming urge to do the right thing takes over, as Peter webs a net for the falling rubble to land on above them. The civilians scramble, as Gwen stares him down directly. It all makes sense. But at the same time, a very different side of Peter Parker's life has been flung wide open. What did she just witness? She thinks back to all the times that Peter had straight up left, or disappeared without a reason. It was all because of this. Peter sees her reaction. Before he or Gwen could say anything to each other, another piece of rubble flings their way. Peter grabs Gwen and launches both of them out of the way. They land, and Peter looks up to see the Vulture, Shocker, Ox, Fancy Dan, Scorpion, Mysterio, Doc Ock, and a bunch of other villains storming the city streets in front of him. Heart pounding, sweat dripping, eyes shuddering, hoping all this is a dream, Peter stops and thinks, how? What could go so wrong? His worst fear, his worst nightmare. Every single villain ever on the loose in New York City, the place where his loved ones lie. And stood next to him, the girl he loves. The girl that he loathes he had a normal life with. But right now, it's life or death. It's survival. Peter says to Gwen that there's no time to explain. He gets her to hop on his back as he swings off into the distance. As he's swinging, he's frantically trying to change into a Spider-Man outfit. He manages to just slip a mask on so no one else can see him. He puts Gwen down far away and tells her to stay safe. He won't let her get hurt. Gwen, slightly annoyed but also doesn't even know how to react, watches on as Peter swings on into the distance, into battle. We cut to Hammerhead, who looks out of his office window and sees the destruction caused by some of the inmates of Rikers Island. He will mutter to himself and say, so it begins, as Martin Lee approaches him. He says that the boss says it's a delightful surprise. Hammerhead agrees, saying it's a welcoming one. He says to get on the phone. Some of these could be used to them. Martin Lee says he's right on it. Hammerhead smiles, as we cut back to Peter, who begins fighting the villains. First he lands on top of Vulture, in which they have a funny interaction between the two of them. Peter tries to rip straight through Vulture's jet engine, and realizes it doesn't work, until he is attacked by Doc Ock from behind. He says it's nice to see him again, and Spider-Man tries to break free, but it's no use. Ock is finally set free on New York once again. Spider-Man kicks Ock in the face and leaps back. Next, he gets whipped by a long green tail as Scorpion, aka Matt Gargan, announces himself, saying he's back for revenge. Slowly but surely, a few of the villains from Rikers appear in front of him. At least Spider-Man has one advantage on his side: they're not all teamed up together like the Sinister Six. He can get to most of them and fight them one by one. Spider-Man starts trying to take out Doc Ock, however is overwhelmed as multiple civilians are caught up in the crossfire. Even though Spider-Man is a veteran of superhero combat by this point in the series, when civilians are involved, he is still biased to saving them. Thus, Peter gets caught up saving people on the street from the destruction when the villains get the better of him. Doc Ock has him down on the street, pinned. The three of them lean over him, saying this is his end, when a smoke bomb appears out of nowhere, choking Ock and the villains, releasing Spider-Man. He does a kickflip backwards and lands on the wall. He strikes a dizzied Ock with a powerful punch and disables Vulture's jet system. While focusing on Doc Ock and Vulture, unfortunately Scorpion escapes into the chaos. And before he could even think about where that bomb came from and how that even helped him, none other than Black Cat appears out of nowhere, landing next to Spider-Man. Surprised, Spider-Man announces her name, and Cat looks disturbed, horrified even. She tells Spider-Man that she needs to brief him on the situation. We cut to a scene with Black Cat and Spider-Man on top of a building away from the commotion. Spider-Man will say that he thought she was still mad at him for the whole not letting her father go situation. Cat will say that she still is, but she had no one else to turn to. She turns and looks away, and looks down. She takes her mask off, revealing Felicia's face underneath. She says that all of this, it was her fault. Peter is confused, and he asks what she means by that. Felicia says that for months, she's been planning the escape of her father. She couldn't do it any other way without alerting the prison guards and drawing attention, unless she worked with someone. Spider-Man will ask who that is, and Felicia will say, Quentin Beck. Spider-Man's eyes widen as he puts the pieces together. That's why he was loose in the prison. This portion of the episode, we will flash back to the previous episode, but to Kat's perspective, as she tells the story and reveals everything that happened as to the events that led to the city-wide Rikers Island villain invasion. Kat will say that once she found a way to get Quentin free among the prison, he used his illusions to make the escape of Walter Hardy seamless. Peter says that he was still there when he checked though. He went to his cell. Walter Hardy was still in Rikers Island. Kat says that that was Mysterio too. He used illusion tech to fool the prison guards as to thinking he was still there. In return, she promised to pay Quentin $50 million worth of high-end jewelry. Kat goes on to say that she doesn't know, but whatever happened caused all this. Peter is furious. He says not only did she work with one of his greatest and most dangerous supervillains, but she actively broke out her father, the man who killed Uncle Ben. Peter asks where Walter Hardy is. Felicia says somewhere safe, somewhere where no one can hurt him ever again. Even you. Peter shouts, saying, hurt him! He caused Peter so much pain over the last few years, and because of him, his uncle isn't alive. Felicia shouts back, saying this is the one reason she didn't want to ask for his help, because she knew that he'd only care about the fact that her father is finally free. Peter will say it's not about that. It's about taking responsibility of your actions, and what she did was bad, and Peter can't let her get away with that. Kat will say it doesn't matter about that now. All that matters is that they fix her mess. They have to put aside their differences, and they have to stop the villains from running the city rampant. Peter agrees that this is definitely the first order of business. They look over the city to flaming buildings and civilians running in terror. The war on New York has just begun, and Spider-Man and Black Cat are the only ones that can stop it. Episode 11. Tactics. We open with Spider-Man and Black Cat looking over the city in peril. The city is going under, and they are the only two that stand in between it and complete destruction. After revealing to Peter her grand plan to release Walter Hardy from prison that went horribly wrong, they both have decided to set aside their differences and try to fix everything and right the wrongs. They have to take out the villains one by one, but it won't be easy. Since this episode will heavily be action with Spider-Man and Black Cat fighting villains, we will cut to a few flashbacks to earlier in the school year, to Peter's history class. During these flashbacks, we will see Peter getting taught about history and tactics during war. Him and his classmates will learn of the Trojan Horse war tactic, which sees an enemy present its rival with a gift, only to reveal there are soldiers inside of the gift, which will go on to then conquer and destroy its rival. After the first class and in the downtime of the episode, we will cut to a few more scenes cutting between MJ and Peter. Their relationship will be expanded upon in these scenes, and the chemistry that they display with one another will be second to none. Since these are flashbacks, they don't directly affect the current point in the story, however they reference the story that has come thus far between these two characters. There clearly is something there between the two of them, but to what extent they are willing to explore that avenue with each other is currently unknown. Obviously, in present day, MJ has already revealed that she knows Peter is Spider-Man, but these flashbacks will take place before this event has ever occurred, meaning that we'll get to see their relationship and what it was like between the two of them before that reveal. We will cut back to present day, and Peter and Black Cat will be fighting their way through the city. Not only have the villains created massive destruction and chaos, but criminals now see this as an opportunity to start riots and rob small stores to take advantage of the situation that they find themselves in. They know that Spider-Man isn't there to stop them, so go ahead with their schemes. On the same hand, the police are also distracted with trying to contain the villains as well. First, Black Cat and Spider-Man start by trying to take out Rhino, who they come into contact with. Spider-Man tries to lead Rhino down to the sewer, the same way in which he defeated him the first time. However, Rhino doesn't fall for this trick and calls Spider-Man out on it. At first, Spider-Man and Black Cat don't work well as a team, especially during this fight. Their falling out has meant that their coordination with one another isn't at its best. Spider-Man gets flung through a window. As Rhino charges towards Spider-Man, Cat jumps on his back and tries to steer him away with her lead, but to no avail, as Rhino flicks her off as if she's nothing. He continues to charge towards Spider-Man before Peter narrowly dodges out of the way. Spider-Man says to Cat that he's never really worked in a team much before, he's usually just used to going solo, and a little joke will be made of the time that he worked with Venom here as well. Cat will say she normally flies solo too, so they're both pretty much in the same position. This, along with the fact that they fell out beforehand, means that they aren't really working well as a team, as I mentioned. While Rhino was recovering from going head-on into a building, they devise a plan. Luckily, since they are closer to Rikers Island on the lower end of Manhattan, they decide to lead Rhino down towards the docks so they can trap him in the East River, where he won't be able to get out. They lead him down, and their plan works. Peter webs Rhino up so he doesn't fall and drown, but he is trapped in the East River, not able to get out because of how much he weighs. Spider-Man tells Rhino that he probably shouldn't move because he'll just end up breaking the webbing and that wouldn't be good for him. He says the cops are on their way. We cut to Jean DeWolf, who is in panic mode. Her first major event as NYPD captain, and this is it. She thinks back to the trust she had in Spider-Man. Not realizing the situation fully, she thinks to herself that Spider-Man is just a fraud. If he was any kind of hero, he wouldn't have let any of this happen in the first place. She's upset, angry. The city that she must protect is under a storm of villains. She shouts to the precinct. Every single superpowered being in this city is to be put under arrest, including Spider-Man. We cut back to Peter and Felicia, who are deciding who to go for next. They realize that at this point, some of the villains have probably formed small groups together, which could be a major issue. And through some scenes with minor research, they both come to the realization that Mysterio and a few other villains have formed a small group together. It currently consists of Mysterio, Ox, Montana, Fancy Dan, Puma, Molten Man, and is being orchestrated by Silvermane, the notorious crime boss. This group of villains proves problematic. Peter says that there is no way that they can both take them all on by themselves, and this is where we flash back to Peter's history lessons once again. They are learning more about the Trojan horse method of attack, learning more about how to break your enemy from the inside. Peter will clearly take this in and will be listening. We flash forward to present day, and Peter will recall this same class and will tell Felicia that they can use her as bait. He will tell Felicia to go to Mysterio as herself, acting as if she is still an ally to Quentin Beck, only to get the upper hand and take down the whole group. We cut to a scene where Felicia approaches the team, saying that they can take advantage of the city's peril together. Silvermane will be wary of Felicia at first, saying that he's heard of her antics. She's the famous cat burglar that everyone is so afraid of, and that if anyone is on her radar, they don't really hold much hope. Felicia smirks and takes the compliment. Felicia says that, on the contrary, she sees the massive Rikers Island breakout as a win for everyone, and says to Silvermane to ask Quentin Beck for his approval. Quentin vouches for her, saying that they just work together. And quite frankly, if it wasn't for Black Cat, none of the villains would have escaped Rikers Island in the first place. Silvermane accepts her into the team, and this is where Spider-Man and Black Cat's first real plan starts to enact and come together. Slowly but surely, Felicia will go round to all the villains, disabling pieces of their equipment or stealing from them without them noticing. This section, I imagine, would be a tense, stealthy, high-stakes section, where the weight of the city lies on Felicia's ability to be able to steal, which lines up perfectly with her character. What she does best will be on display here, except the stakes is that the whole city depends on her. She finishes by stealing Silvermane's gun, in which when he realizes, he confronts her. But before she could be restrained, Spider-Man swoops in. Shocker's blasters don't work, Fancy Dan lost his speed, Ox has lost a portion of his strength, Mysterio can't create the same illusions as he could before, and their plan pays off. Spider-Man and Black Cat, using the Trojan Horse method, manage to take out all the villains fairly easily, apart from Molten Man, who remains. However, we will get the feeling that Molten Man doesn't really want to fight, and manages to escape during the chaos, when he realizes that Spider-Man and Black Cat have the upper hand on the villains. The rest of the villains are sent to prison, and the only ones that weren't captured were Molten Man and Scorpion. Only them two out of the rest ain't bad, says Spider-Man, but there is still work that needs to be done. He looks over to Cat, who is reflecting on the situation. She knows what he's about to say, and he says that she needs to hand over Walter Hardy. She knows that his release is the only cause of this. Peter says that he won't ask a second time. Felicia sheds a tear and says fine, on one condition. Peter asks, what's that? And Felicia says that as long as you forgive him, she will send him back. Peter squints. Hearing those words almost made his heart crease. Felicia could sense the emotions that Peter was feeling. She goes on to say that she can see it through his mask, the way he talks, the way he acts. It's like those emotions of his uncle's death are fresh. She says to Peter that he's lost someone recently, hasn't he? Peter holds his head down. Felicia will say, so you have. She will go on to explain how she knows that he doesn't want anyone to get hurt, which is exactly why he cares so much about the person who killed his uncle being behind bars. But she's willing to let her father go, if it means he can get forgiveness for what he did. Peter looks away from her, almost not agreeing at first. She says that her father isn't a bad man, he just had bad luck. Felicia says that one day you'll have to give in to forgiveness. And after all of this, she has realized now that her father should have never been let out. And she can forgive Peter for not letting him go the first time back in Season 2. She no longer holds that grudge, but he should do the same thing. Because if he doesn't forgive Walter Hardy for what happened that night, it will eat him up inside. It'll eat him up until the day he dies. Even if he's not willing to forgive himself for what happened, at least forgive the man that now has reformed. Peter will turn back around to face her. He understands. A massive sigh of relief comes over Peter, as if he's been waiting to hear those words. She'll go on to rhetorically ask Peter, isn't that what Spider-Man's about? Second chances? And Peter will look up and say, I forgive him. I could never forgive myself. And with that, the city is safe. Walter Hardy returns behind bars. Spider-Man swings off into the sunset. He is now moved on. But one last thing before the episode ends. Molten Man climbs an elevator to a dark office building. As the doors open and the elevator dings, he is met by 5 people. Hammerhead, Chameleon, Martin Lee, Flint Marko, and Mac Gargan, who during the event of the Battle of New York had found himself in the hands of Hammerhead. Hammerhead, who welcomes Molten Man with open arms, says that this is the place to be. Together they will destroy Spider-Man. At first he'll be cautious, saying that isn't what he wants. He's had his time in prison to ponder. That's not what he wants anymore. He just wants to be cured. He just wants to be normal. Hammerhead says that's understandable, which is why the boss has promised a cure if he joins the team, and if the task is carried out successfully. Mark will say that he's heard that one before in a slightly stern voice, but Hammerhead reassures him that his boss, the new big man, is very persuasive and keeps his word. Mark powers down and says he's sorry for almost lashing out. Hammerhead reaches out and puts his arm around him and says don't ever apologize. If there's one thing he's learned recently, it's that you should never apologize. And with that, we end the episode. Episode 12, Life Choices. Spider-Man swings across the city. Fires burn, but the chaos is no longer. How could he let such things happen? He perches on the side of a building. The fight is over, right? Or is it only just beginning? He thinks back to everything that has happened throughout his school year. Things don't add up. Captain Stacy was onto something earlier on in the year before his passing, but he can't quite figure it out yet. There is an internal struggle blinding his every move, but before he could focus on anything Peter Parker related, there are much bigger matters to be thinking about. Peter swoops down and saves a family from a burning building, and before Spider-Man can leave, he hears them distress. Where can they go? Where are they going to stay? They have a 2 and a 4-year-old child. How are they going to keep them warm? Spider-Man thinks to himself, he can't just leave them there, especially as the guilt of this whole situation partially rides on himself. He says he knows a place that they can stay. We cut to the villains at Hammerhead's HQ. Mark Allen starts to become curious as to who the new big man is. Hammerhead says he's not allowed to tell anyone under any circumstances. Mark questions this, and Hammerhead becomes impatient, saying that the big man wants to remain anonymous, and anonymous he will remain. Hammerhead rallies all the villains and says that it's time. He states that they have enough firepower to take down Spider-Man, and their mission is to stop him. The big man has a feud with him, and the only way he can make it back onto the scene is with Spider-Man out of the picture. Hammerhead will tell everyone to scout and find him, and when someone does, to report back. As everyone leaves, we will follow Martin Lee out of the building as he looks rather sorrowful. At this portion of the episode, we will flash back to Martin Lee's past, exploring some of his backstory. As he walks home, we will get flashes of his life, his family, and how happy he was with his wife and his 6-year-old daughter. During this flashback sequence, we will also see how Martin Lee created Feast. We will see him take out a loan from none other than Norman Osborn, indicating that this was a few years ago. Osborn will lend Lee the money he needs to create Feast. Through seeing how much he cares for his daughter and due to how much of a family man Martin is, we really understand his goodwill to open up Feast so he can help people. However, Martin struggles to repay Norman. The Feast centers don't bring in much money, and Martin is in debt. We get a scene of Martin and Norman arguing in his office at Osborn Mansion. After this slight disagreement, Martin leaves, but he bumps into someone on their way into the office. The man looks back to reveal none other than Hammerhead. It is revealed that this scene took place just before the ending of Season 1, Episode 4, just prior to when Hammerhead approached Norman about creating supervillains to keep Spider-Man distracted from Tombstone's criminal empire. Martin's feud with Norman happened around the same time as Season 1. A few weeks go by and Lee still can't pay off Norman, and one night, him and his family go missing. We go on to reveal that Martin was a part of one of Norman's questionable experiments, to begin before we get the likes of the Sandman or the Rhino. Norman tested on him to try and create a magic-like super being to take down Spider-Man in aid of Tombstone's criminal empire, as we mentioned before. Since Lee couldn't repay the debt that he owed Norman, Norman decided to take matters of repayment into his own hands. However, the experiment goes wrong. Lee bursts out with anger, dispersing a massive amount of energy. His family, who were also in captivity, die in the process. Lee grovels over the ones he lost, as Osborn evacuates. And instead of trying to hunt, fight, or even kill Norman Osborn, Lee goes into hiding, afraid of what Norman could do to him next. Which is why we haven't seen Martin Lee or Mr. Negative throughout Seasons 2, 3, or 4 up until now. It wasn't until Norman Osborn had died at the end of Season 2 that Martin Lee came out from hiding, taking back Feast and running it for the people who need it once again. However, underneath the kind man is a rageful, bitter, and darker side, his negative side, in which, to make ends meet and to keep Feast on the ground, uses it to commit crimes and do Hammerhead's bidding. Lee had met Hammerhead almost a year ago now, and Hammerhead recruited him back to be a part of the big man's revival into New York. Even though Lee doesn't really know who he's working for, he has to, so he can make the money it takes to sustain Feast. Thus we end a crucial flashback sequence explaining and expanding upon Martin Lee's character that has been hinted throughout the season so far. Lee returns to his home and decides he wants to visit Feast to see how everyone is getting on. When he arrives, Spider-Man also arrives as well. Spider-Man escorts a family into the center, who have 2 children, one a 2-year-old and one a 4-year-old. Lee thinks back to what Hammerhead said, and he knows that he must inform him and the other villains as to Spider-Man's whereabouts. But he thinks back to his daughter who he lost. He wouldn't want someone else's child to get caught up in this destruction chaos the same way his did. Lee doesn't know what to do. Aunt May, who is running a shift at Feast during this time, approaches Lee and sees he's quite stunned. Lee asks how long Spider-Man has been here. May says that he's been bringing people in all day. May realizes Lee is really out of it, almost like he's not listening. She asks him if he's okay, and Lee says that he just needs a minute. He goes up to his office and lies down. He looks out of his blinds. He can see Spider-Man making sure everyone's okay. Hammerhead comes over his comm, asking if he's found anything. Lee gulps and doesn't respond. Hammerhead shouts his name, asking again. Lee says no, very hesitantly. Hammerhead tells him to keep looking. Spider-Man leaves the building as Lee takes a massive sigh of relief. We cut to the next day as we follow MJ at Midtown High. She notices Peter isn't there. She starts to worry. The last time that she saw him was just before the breakout at Rikers Island. He is nowhere to be seen. The register is called in class and Peter doesn't answer. His seat is also empty. The teacher looks quite concerned as well, as finals are just right around the corner too, so Peter should be attending class as a top priority. We follow MJ throughout the day and once again Peter is nowhere to be seen. She starts to worry even more. She calls Aunt May, asking if she's seen Peter. She says that she hasn't. She's been working overtime at Feast recently and hasn't had time to go home. She says that Spider-Man has been coming in and out all night with people looking for a place to stay, so she's had to work overtime. MJ eases slightly and says that hopefully she finds him and hopes he's okay. May, slightly worried as to her nephew's whereabouts, asks MJ to call her if she sees him. MJ agrees and puts down the phone, at ease, knowing that Peter is just doing Spider-Man stuff. Spider-Man swings through the city. As we cut to him, the sun sets for another day. Peter hasn't slept in over 24 hours, trying to clean up the mess that he made. He feels like he's hallucinating. He rubs his eyes, when his spider sense wakes him up as it's going crazy. But Peter is too lethargic to react in time, as the Scorpion tackles him from behind. He says that he's finally found him. Peter thinks to himself that this is the last thing he needs right now. Spider-Man fights the Scorpion back, and a battle ensues that captures the attention of the public around them. When the Scorpion gets a minute, he radios in to the other villains, saying that he's found him. Peter says, "Great, there's more of you guys?" Scorpion smirks and carries on battling Spider-Man, as the others arrive one by one. A few moments pass before Spider-Man lies on the ground, injured in front of 5 villains before him. Scorpion, Sandman, Molten Man, Mr. Negative, and Shocker. Tired, hurt, down, even in the face of defeat, Spider-Man says, "There's only 5 of you? You guys can't even get the memo right." And with that, Spider-Man's quips are halted as the 6th member of the team joins them, walking through the middle to meet Spider-Man's eyes. It's Captain Stacy. Spider-Man freaks out as his eyes widen. He can't believe it. Captain Stacy says it's time for his end. What life choices had led Peter Parker to this moment? And how will he get himself out of this mess? Episode 13, Finals. The Sinister Six loom over him. Peter looks up at Captain Stacy, who tells him this is the end. Spider-Man gulps and says, "You died. What is this? Mysterio?" Stacy begins to fight Spidey. In combat, he is well trained and has the upper hand on Spider-Man. The other villains start to join in. Sandman blasts him back. Mr. Negative swipes for his body. Molten Man burns multiple holes in his suit. Scorpion slaps him with his tail, and finally Shocker blasts him with his new upgraded gauntlets. The villains that Spider-Man has already faced before have had an upgrade. Peter knows that all of these guys aren't intelligent enough to gain technical advancements in the way that they have. They are working for someone. Someone with a lot of knowledge in that field. They ragdoll Spider-Man about, beat him down more than he has ever been beaten before. The previous fights with the Six weren't easy, but this was on another level. The upgraded tech, along with the unpredictability of the villains that he has never faced before, it becomes too much for him. As he lay there on the ground, Mr. Negative is contacted by Hammerhead over comms. He says good job, and to unmask him. Hammerhead, watching from afar, is finally about to get the reveal he's been waiting for since Spider-Man's first entrance onto the scene. Mr. Negative steps forward and pulls his mask up, and underneath is Peter Parker. Mr. Negative gasps and steps back, dropping the mask to the floor. Sandman exhales that he's just a kid. as Chameleon looks suspiciously over to Mr. Negative, asking if he knows this guy. Molten Man powers down, and Mark Allen steps forward and sympathetically says, "That's Peter Parker." But before they can move in on him, Peter opens his eyes and realizes his mask is gone. He webs it from the floor and in a swift fashion zips away. Chameleon is furious, saying, "Chase after him then." Sandman says there's no point. He's gone. We get a very desperate montage on Peter swinging through the city, hurt and injured. He lands on top of a building and collapses. Something is wrong with his leg, as he goes limp. As the adrenaline wears off, Peter starts to feel the pain. He's cut, bruised, and his leg isn't right. He manages to crawl home, as we cut to Aunt May. Aunt May is sat on the sofa with Mary Jane. They're both having a catch-up with each other. Aunt May is expressing how she's really worried about Peter recently. He's always been pretty secretive, but this is on another level. She knows that she works all the time, but she really doesn't see him much anymore. And she doesn't know what's going on with him anymore. She doesn't know if he's in some kind of trouble. MJ reassures May, saying that he's fine. She's seen him plenty of times at school. He is okay. Aunt May holds her head down and says that she hopes so. This is when they both hear a noise that came from upstairs. This startles both of them. MJ says that she'll go and check it out. We cut to Peter, who collapses into his room, groaning in pain. MJ bursts through the door and notices Peter on the floor. Immediately she closes the door behind her as to not to alert Aunt May, and gets down to help Peter as he lay on the floor. She panics, asks him if he's okay frantically. Peter says no. Aunt May shouts upstairs asking if everything is okay. MJ says everything's fine. She makes up an excuse on the spot saying that the window in Peter's room is jammed and she's going to try and fix it. Aunt May retreats and goes back to watching television. MJ holds Peter up, but he groans in pain as he can't step on his leg. MJ tells Peter he's going to have to go to the hospital as she rips into his suit onto his leg and notices the swelling. Peter says no, he can't let Aunt May see him like this. MJ says that she's going to go get help. Peter shouts no and says to stay with him. He gulps. Tears fill up in his eyes. He tells MJ, gritted through his teeth, that his leg is in so much pain. MJ will be lost for words. She sits down next to Peter and puts her arm on his shoulder. She looks him dead in the eye. The pain, the suffering, but the determination looks right back at her. MJ places her hand on his cheek as a gesture of calmness and reassurance. Peter closes his eyes and then opens them again. This time looking back at her is comfort. The intense spark of MJ and Peter can be felt throughout the scene. MJ is not just Peter's best friend. She is his comfort. She's his reassurance. She's his rock. Peter opens up. In one swift sentence he says they know. MJ asks, who? And Peter will say the villains. They know. They know about him, his secret identity. They know who he is. He's going to have to go far away. From her, from Gwen, from Aunt May, from everyone else. MJ says that he can't leave. MJ needs him here. Peter looks down and says everyone's going to be in danger because of him, including MJ. MJ puts her hand on his cheek once again and says don't worry about her. Peter says that he's always going to worry. MJ asks what is he going to do. Peter says he doesn't know. We cut to the villains who are back at the HQ. Hammerhead is absolutely livid. He throws things around the room in anger. He says they had him right there. What was the hesitation? Sandman says that he was just a kid. He goes on to say that they've scared him now. Let's just call it quits. Hammerhead slams his fist down on the table and says, do you even know who we're dealing with? Hammerhead says he knows Spider-Man and he knows that he will never quit. That's just who he is. Martin Lee can be seen in the corner, being quiet, trying to process what he just saw, thinking to May Parker, Peter's aunt, thinking about how he would feel if someone had beaten his nephew to near death. He feels dread, sorrow, and regret. Hammerhead says that he heard someone mention his identity. He looks towards Molten Man. Mark holds his head down and says his name is Peter Parker, and that he went to school with his sister. Hammerhead says that's perfect. They'll trap him at school with all his friends and colleagues, and he'll have nowhere to run or hide. Mark pipes up saying, whatever you do, just don't hurt my sister. Hammerhead turns around with a stern look on his face. He says for too long has Spider-Man slipped through his grasp. The big man wants the job done, but he also wants to see Spider-Man perish just as much. They will do what must be done. The next morning, Peter comes downstairs, afraid to see Aunt May. He still can't walk. Something is really, really wrong with his leg. Not even his healing factor is sorting this issue out. Most of his cuts and bruises have subsided apart from his black eye. Luckily for Peter, May had already gone to work. He looks in the basement to find some old crutches that Uncle Ben had when he fractured his leg one time. He takes them to school with him, to support him up. At school, MJ sees Peter and asks what is he doing here, saying that he needs to rest. Peter says that he's got some finals to do. MJ smiles, saying he's always the fighter. Despite the dull tone, Peter and MJ can always make each other smile. Peter says they'll also be looking for him, and MJ was right. If he leaves, they'll just tear the whole city to pieces looking for him. Aunt May's at work, so they can search the house with no trouble. Here, there's nothing stopping them from hurting everyone inside, including MJ. He needs to be here, just in case. On the way to class, Peter will see Gwen. This is the first time they have seen each other since his identity was revealed to her a few episodes ago. Gwen looks at him mesmerized, lost for words. Peter can see that she's in some sort of disbelief. Peter simply says, "I'm sorry I never told you before." Gwen will say to him that the only reason they couldn't have been together is because he was Spider-Man. Peter will hold his head down as the bell for class will go. He will say he's sorry, but by then, Gwen had already started heading to class, before the massive rush of students came by them, leaving Peter alone in the crowd. We cut to Peter in class, completing a test. All he could think about is the villains, the Sinister Six, coming for him, potentially hurting everyone around him. It was only a matter of time. And before he knew it, about 30 minutes into his exam, his spider sense goes off. Screaming can be heard from outside the class, and in a scurry, everything goes quiet for Peter. All he could think about was getting out into the hallway, and getting there quick. The class starts to scatter, as he rushes his way to the hallway. As the students run the other way, a fiery hole in the wall stares back at Peter, with a few members of the Six looking down at him. Peter throws his crutches to the floor, and limps into position. "Let's do this," he'll say. Peter will web either side of the hallway and will fling himself at Scorpion, who stood in front of him, kicking him out of the building. Peter lands, his leg still hurting. Shocker blasts him back into the building. However, as the Six start to collectively come together, Peter realizes that he needs to regroup himself. He can't lose this fight. Peter hides in the janitor's closet. The Six spread out trying to find him. Meanwhile, the rest of the students have evacuated now, leaving the hallways empty. However, a blonde-haired girl still peeks her head around the corner. It's Gwen, and she can see Shocker heading her way. She hides around the corner. Meanwhile, with Peter, he thinks to himself that he has to pick them off one by one. It's the only way he's going to win this fight. Peter sees Shocker walking outside the janitor's closet. He will think to himself that this is his chance. He can take Shocker out, right here and now. He leaps out of the closet, tackling him to the ground. Shocker elbows him off him. Peter webs his gauntlets and pulls one of them off. However, it explodes in Peter's face. Shocker laughs and tells Peter that if it's removed from him, it has a self-destruct device planted inside. Peter coughs and finds it hard to get back up. Gwen watches from afar as Shocker approaches Peter. Just as Shocker loaded up a shot directly aimed at Peter's face, he falls to the ground as he's knocked out from a metal pipe hitting him from around the back of the head, and Gwen stood in front of Peter, holding her hand out to help him up. Peter takes it as he stands up, still limping with his leg. Peter says thank you. Gwen says it wasn't fair to leave her out of his life like that. Peter says he was just trying to protect her. Gwen says that that wasn't his choice to make. Peter holds his head down, thinking to himself, that's what MJ told him about a week ago. Gwen will tell Peter you're welcome, but go save the world. Peter, with a look of determination, gains the energy to leap out of the hole in the wall. He will reach for his mask in his pocket and pull it over his face, and rip his t-shirt and trousers off to reveal a worn, torn and almost destroyed Spider-Man suit. He will encounter Sandman, who is patrolling the front of the building. They engage in combat as the other villains start to join in. It's ride or die now for Peter. He has to win. There is no other option. But once again, as the villains all pound down on him, Peter is injured, hurt, outnumbered, and outclassed in every way. A crowd starts to form outside Midtown's front garden as the police arrive on the scene as well, watching from afar. Jean DeWolf will exit her car as she sees Spider-Man on the ground, almost close to death. As the five of them stand over him once more, Chameleon will say, "Let's finish the job this time." The students and the civilians that are watching on are stunned at what they are witnessing. Chameleon picks up Spider-Man and holds him in front of them all. Martin Lee, who hasn't really gotten all that involved in the fight, stands quietly in the back, once again thinking about who he's really hurting. Thinking back to his family that he lost, he couldn't let May lose her nephew, the same way that he lost his daughter to Norman Osborn. We also look at Flint Marko, who also stands there with a face of regret. He's only doing this for his family, who are held captive by Hammerhead. He didn't want any of this. He didn't want this life any longer. We also take a look at Mark, who looks out into the crowd, and standing right there is Liz, his sister. Crying, distraught, and overwhelmed, Mark realized what he was doing. He may be doing all of this for a cure and another chance at normal life, but at what cost to those he loves? Chameleon holds Spider-Man in front of Scorpion and asks if he would like to do the honors. Scorpion says absolutely. But before he could deliver the final blow, Mark shouts stop. Chameleon looks at Mark perplexed. Hammerhead comes over the comms and asks Chameleon what's the holdup. Mark says that this needs to stop. Martin, Lee, and Flint Marko also step forward, agreeing with Mark. Chameleon is confused and angrily asks what are they doing. Lee says it's time for this to end. Flint says he didn't want any of this life. He can't hurt anyone else. Chameleon, with a face of anger, drops Spider-Man as him and Scorpion engage in battle with Lee, Marko, and Mark Allen, but they're overpowered, and the Sinister Six implodes in front of Spider-Man. Peter finds the strength to get up and watch as Mark, Lee, and Flint allow themselves to be arrested on sight, redeeming themselves, not just as villains, but as people. All three of them coming to terms with what they did, and how it was wrong. Lee learning that he couldn't let another mother lose his son. Mark learning that there may never be a cure, but maybe he can save everyone else. And Flint Marko knowing that he doesn't want this life anymore, hoping that there's another way to save his family. Lee, the most emotional out of the bunch, realizes in one swift moment that the life he has been thrown away. Flint is happy that he doesn't have to cause any more suffering, and Mark realizes that the cure was never physical, but to not cause any harm to those that he loves. Scorpion and the Chameleon are also apprehended by large amounts of police, leaving Spider-Man. The crowd still persists and watches on as Jean DeWolf approaches him. Spider-Man thanks Jean for arriving when she did. Jean DeWolf holds up her badge and says Spider-Man is under arrest. Spider-Man sighs in disbelief, not having any energy to fight it. But before she could cuff him, a voice shouts from across the crowd. It's Gwen Stacy. Jean DeWolf turns around. Gwen says you can't arrest him. All Spider-Man does is put himself on the line for everyone else and this city. He's selfless, and he thinks of anyone but himself. Gwen says this in realization of the fact that all this time, Peter would put himself on the line for anyone as a selfless act to protect. As much as she wishes she knew about Peter sooner, Peter Parker is a good person. She will shout to Jean DeWolf that her father knew Spider-Man was a good person, and that if he had one dying wish, it would be that Spider-Man carried on doing what he does best for the city, which is protecting it, protecting its people. DeWolf thinks to herself. She thinks about the relationship that Stacy had with Spider-Man, and she retracts her cuffs and tells Spider-Man to get out of here before she changes her mind. Spider-Man, with the strength he had left, leaps into the air and swings away. We cut to a scene with Hammerhead, who has failed. The villains are in prison, and Hammerhead has nothing left. A voice can be heard in the background, a familiar one at that. Hammerhead says he's sorry he failed. The man says he didn't just fail, he has made his life so much harder. He says he'll just have to take Spider-Man out by himself, as none other than Norman Osborn reveals himself to be alive and back in the picture after all of this time. He tells Hammerhead to leave his sight, and he does so, retreating back into the shadows. All of this, Hammerhead, the Sinister Six, the break-ins, was all down to Norman Osborn. We cut to later on that night. Peter Parker lay there on the sofa with an ice pack over his face. A rumble can be heard at the door as Aunt May enters the house and sees him. She hugs him with a slight tear in her eye. She says that she heard what happened today, and if he's okay. Peter says yeah, he just got caught up in the crossfire is all, using that as to explain the cuts and bruises all over his body. They have a conversation with each other about the lack of communication recently. May will say that she knows that she's been working a lot, but she's worried sick. She never sees him anymore. Peter apologizes and says he's been busy, but hopefully he'll have more time to see her now. May says that's good, because she's actually planning to go out for Mary Jane's birthday with Anna and MJ next week. Peter's eyes widen. He didn't even realize it was her birthday soon. However, there's a ring at the door. May says that could be her. Peter says that he'll get it. Peter walks to the door and opens it, and to his surprise, it wasn't Mary Jane, it was Gwen. Gwen will say that she wanted to see him, and she needed to talk. Peter says, sure. He steps outside and shuts the door behind him so Aunt May can't hear. She will say that she wishes things could have been different. She will say that she loves him. Peter will say, I love you too, as he holds his hand out to her, but Gwen pulls away. She will say to Peter that she wished she knew sooner about him and about Spider-Man. Peter's face trembles slightly, trying to hold back emotion. Gwen will go on to say that after Harry left and after her father died, all she really had left was Peter. But he ignored her, and she now knows why. Peter tries to explain that he was only doing it to protect her, and she says that she understands. If she was in the same position, she probably would too. But it was never his choice to make. It was never his choice to choose whether Gwen should have been in his life or not. Gwen will say that she has nothing left here, so she came to say goodbye. Peter asks, what does that mean? Gwen will say that she's moving across state. She's got an offer for an entry into a college in San Francisco that wants to take her as an early applicant due to her expressive knowledge in biology, and she's going to take it. Peter's face drops. He congratulates her, but it's more of a bittersweet congratulation than anything else. Peter gulps and asks when she's going. Gwen will say that she flies tomorrow. Peter looks down. He looks back up at her and locks eyes. He says that he'll miss her, and Gwen says that she will too. They hug one another, and Gwen holds him tight, but Peter holds her tighter. And with one final goodbye, Gwen Stacy leaves Peter Parker on his doorstep. Lovers that could have been. Peter sits down on his step and watches as the sun sets over Queens. We will cut to one final montage of Peter repairing the suit, him visiting MJ, giving her a birthday present, and life going generally in the right direction. A chapter has been closed, but a brand new one has been opened, as we end on a shot of the dinner between Aunt May, Anna Watson, Peter Parker, and Mary Jane Watson. And we conclude this story of Spectacular Spider-Man. Thank you very much for watching Spectacular Spider-Man Season 4. Hopefully you all enjoyed this season. If you did, make sure to leave a like on it, and also make sure to subscribe so you do not miss Venom Lethal Protector. Yes, that's right, Venom Lethal Protector is the next thing in this kind of, I guess you could say, universe of Spider-Man stories. That is the spin-off that we are going to be doing of Venom. We're also going to be making a summer break movie that will take place in between seasons 4 and 5, so make sure you don't miss that as well. And obviously going into season 5, you are going to need to have watched the summer break movie, because obviously that will tie into the story of season 5. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Make sure you're subscribed, and yeah, leave a like, leave a comment what you thought of the entire season. I want to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thanks for the continued support, and I'll see you guys in a bit. Take care, and peace.